which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Our next item is changes to the order of the agenda. Staff, do we have any recommended changes?
We have no changes.
No changes. Council members?
No.
None. That brings us to item 3, which is council communications and announcements. Why don't we start over here with Vice Mayor Davids?
All right, I'd like to start by welcoming 3 little boys to the TV program. These are my grandsons. They're out there in TV land. We have John and Peter and Bobby. You don't see them, but they see me. We had this discussion at dinner, and I just want you guys to know that we're having a great time. They're heading out on the red eye for North Carolina, so I'll see you when you get back. Now, for business.
Very good.
I attended a meeting of the Congestion Management and Air Quality Committee this afternoon, and a couple things came out that will be of interest to you. We agreed to retitle the committee the Congestion Management and Environmental Quality Committee, since we've been charged with being the front committee for CCAG, City and County Government Association, on environmental matters that come before the county and before CCAG. So we've extended our charge and we've changed our name, and you'll be hearing more about not CCAG, or CMAC rather, but CMEC. It doesn't sound quite the same, but we'll get used to it. The other issue is the possibility of joining with other cities in the county on preparing our next housing element. We have done this ourselves in the past, as have other cities. There's a lot of duplication involved in preparing the information. It takes a long time, a lot of staff time, and basically a lot of what happens is repeated city by city. So this proposal comes through CCAG, and it would allow us to join with other cities in the county to prepare a document for the cities that come together, and also participate with those cities in terms of how we allocate housing funds and how we're responsible for housing needs in the county. So I believe that staff has a copy of this proposal, and we'll probably see it at one of our agendas in due time. So keep your eye on that. And that's all I have.
Thank you, Tom. Councilmember Versili. Councilmember Lewis.
None.
None. Okay. And I have just a couple of items. One is that we just came from a meeting upstairs where the police officers showed us our preparations for emergencies, and we were given a little guide here. I've written some notes on it, but for council members to give us some direction when there is an emergency. But I also wanted to announce that it was told to us at the meeting that next week sometime we will have online a citizens preparedness course that folks can log into and take a course. So you might want to, if you're interested in that, check that out either next week or perhaps the following week. For sure it'll be up the following week. Also wanted to give recognition to our Chief of Police, Greg Rothaus, who wrote an article that showed up in a trade magazine. It's called The Police Chief, right here, and it's an article about team building. Anyone interested in that might want to check it out, but I just mostly wanted to point that out to show some of the level of commitment to the broader community that we have from our police officers here in the city, and the quality of our police chief to write an article such as that for his trade magazine. Also wanted to notice that a company wrote us a letter. I'm not going to say the name of the company because I don't care to necessarily do advertising for just some private company, but they did write us a letter that was very nice, commending one of our police officers, Officer McKenna, for professionalism and expedient efficiency in capturing 2 suspected intruders during a break-in at Heather's school. And the reason they are noticing that to us is because their equipment is the monitoring equipment, but they admit in the letter or acknowledge in the letter that, you know, their equipment takes you so far. You have to have police officers show up, sometimes go into a risky situation to bring a proper solution to something like that. And so I just wanted to give commendation to Officer McKenna for the fine work. And then lastly, I wanted to just mention an item that I would like to have some buy-in from the council to see on our agenda for our next meeting, and that is I've been talking to some folks about the idea of doing a mayor's family fun ride around the perimeter of San Carlos as a fundraiser for Pass Christian, and as part of that I'll also be doing I'm doing a bicycle ride in Oregon in September, and I'm intending to make that a fundraising event for Pass Christian as well. So if we could have that on the agenda. It would take a little bit of staff time. I have talked to Parks and Rec Director about it, and I've talked to the Chief of Police and the City Manager about it. But if we could have it on the agenda as an item of discussion, I would appreciate it.
Are we riding horses or?
We're riding bicycles.
Bicycles.
Yes.
Well, I figured it could be a
You can
bicycle.
come on a horse if you like, but yes.
And we're going to go up to the top?
No, not that far. The Alameda, we'll call that
that's
the perimeter.
good stuff,
Yes,
yes.
right. But if it's amiable to everybody, we'll put that on the agenda for
sounds like
next
fun.
time for discussion. Thank you. And moving on, then, that brings us to item 4, which is reports to council by staff. It's our City Manager, Mark Weiss.
Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council, in February we had a council retreat. A strategic work plan was developed at that meeting. One of the objectives within that strategic work plan was for a review of methods by which we could obtain and retain quality city staff within this organization. And one of the specific objectives within that goal was to establish a subcommittee to review the relations between city staff and the City Council. To that end, a subcommittee of the City Council was formed, comprised of council members Gracilli and Lewis. City Manager was appointed to it, and 2 staff members, the Economic Development Director, Laura Sneidman, and the Chief of Police, Greg Rothas. That committee met on 2 separate occasions. We've also had communications in the interim to discuss this particular task within the work program, and collectively, after discussing it, prepared the memorandum that has been included within your packet. Just in summary, and I won't go through the entire document, but just in summary, I think it's fair to say that the document recognizes the importance of this issue and praises the City Council for recognizing the importance of this issue by including it within the work plan as being something specifically worthwhile taking up as an objective. Secondly, the memorandum discusses some of the impacts if good relations or dialogue were to break down. And there is some discussion within the memorandum of specific instances that could occur and what the impacts of those instances might be. But I think most importantly, the memorandum then also touches upon the fact that this city has also got a code of ethics and a code of conduct already in place that's been formally adopted by the City Council. And that document actually outlines many of the things that the committee had talked about, and many of the things that had been discussed previously at the retreat and workshop. And specifically not only talked about the code of conduct and the ways that we can enhance our relations between council members, between council and staff, and between the city and the public at large, but it also outlines policies and procedures by which, if there is a breakdown in that dialogue, procedures that breakdown can be addressed. And the committee itself simply thought it was appropriate that we revisit the issue, remind everyone at the staff level and the City Council level that code of conduct is in place, that there is a process, and that it should be used in the rare instance that there might be cause to bring that policy into play. With that would conclude the staff presentation on the report. The staff members are here in attendance, and of course the City Council members that were participating on the committee are here as well. Be happy to address any questions that you might have.
Okay, very well. And if we have any questions for Mr. Weiss or the two council members that sat on that are Brad and Bob Grisilli. So if you would like to add anything.
Sure. I just want to say it was an important enough issue that it came up at our strategic retreat and as a staff concern about council and staff relations. And obviously as a council we take that very seriously, and as a city it's an important element that council and staff have a good enough working relationship that we can attract quality employees, retain quality employees, and also just work well together, because obviously we're the gears between council and staff that hopefully can make the city run well. And when those relationships are good, I think the city can thrive. It's certainly an element that helps make the city thrive. So it certainly is an important issue, and so I'm glad we took the time to meet and talk about it. The good news in meeting was folks from staff felt like, in general, relationships are good right now. Staff and council relationships are good, and that was a positive thing to hear from staff. That being said, I think staff's also concerned that when there are breakdowns in staff and council relationships, that it can create an atmosphere of fear. And in any organization, if there's an atmosphere of breakdown, an atmosphere of fear, that you can get less than people's best efforts if they're concerned about their own livelihood, about how they do their job, and the important thing is, Mr. Weiss pointed out, is in the ethics, it is very clear. There's a clear decorum by which the city council should conduct our business and our business with staff, our business with the public, as well as it also helps govern staff behaviors. And there is clear language in that. And I know it was good for me personally just to review that. It's probably a good thing for us to review on a yearly basis. I think we need to be very careful. We've had a lot of turnover in the last year or two in the city, and it's always difficult because there's a learning curve for all of us in moving things forward. And I think also in order to attract those top employees from around the county and from around the region, it's important to keep our relationships strong. So I was happy to be a part of those meetings, and I think it's good to be aware of those issues, and I thank staff for their time in that regard as well.
Thank you, Councilmember Lewis. Councilmember Bob Grisilli.
I concur with what Councilmember Lewis said it very well. Thank you. I would just like to say, and I'm sure he would agree with me, that I'd like to thank City Manager Mark Weiss and Laura Sneidman and Chief Rothaus for the openness of the discussion. I felt it was a very good one where no one felt that they had to, should we say, hold back anything. And I think all five of us had very direct conversation, and I thought that was really important. And I'd also like to thank Councilmember Lewis also for that too. We all, I think, basically shared our ideas and our thoughts, and that's how we can get to the report that we had. So Brad said it very well earlier, and I don't need to repeat the other comments that he had, but I do agree with them all.
I have one question for the committee. Was there any discussion about the, say, usefulness of the retreat that we had and how that might impact relations with staff, between staff and council?
I think we didn't spend as much time talking about that in a primary fashion, but I know that I think it was mentioned in those meetings, and it's certainly been mentioned by staff in the since our retreat, is that I think staff felt the fact that council would sit down with staff, commit to an all-day retreat to exchange ideas, and also to take staff concerns as in parallel with council concerns, was something that was received really well by staff, and a positive step in that ongoing relationship.
Because I do, the reason I asked the question is I did feel like that did happen, and it was a positive step. And it also, it's interesting when you spend all day with somebody, you know, you get to know them a little differently than you would otherwise. And so I know myself, I felt like that was a healthy exercise, and I was looking for something, and perhaps that's it, where you have something that's sort of ongoing that helps to build relationships and make adjustments, you know, as you go on in time as well.
Well, if I hear you hinting about a ski trip up to Tahoe for staff and council on our nickel, well,
Yeah. Vice Mayor Davids, did you have a...
No, I want to thank you for putting in your time and for a good report.
Okay, thank you. All right, that moves us on to, thank you very much to council members. That brings us to item 5, which is council appointments and presentations. The first is simply to acknowledge proclamation declaring July as Parks and Recreation Month. We have a actual certificate coming your way, Barry, but would you like to come to the podium and say something about Parks and Recreation Month? Is Barry Weiss, our Parks and Recreation Director.
Thank you, Mayor Grocott, members of the council. July is annually recognized as Parks and Recreation Month, both here in San Carlos and actually across the nation. And the proclamation that you have in front of you, the statements in that proclamation speak to the values of Parks and Recreation. A little something special this year. As you know, we have 2 new parks. Arguello just came online last week, and Hillcrest Circle Park came online several months ago, but during the rainy season we couldn't celebrate it. So as part of Parks and Recreation Month, on Saturday, July 22nd, we're going to have a formal opening and ribbon cutting for both of those parks. So that'll be a really good highlight to Parks and Recreation Month in San Carlos. So to the public and to the council and the commission and everybody involved, or if you just want to see the park, Saturday, July 22nd, 10 a.m. at Arguello and 12 o'clock noon at Hillcrest Circle Park. And I thank you for your consideration of the proclamation.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I think, Barry, isn't Youth Advisory associated with Parks and Recreation?
The Youth Advisory Council is part of Parks and Recreation. And for this part, I'm going to turn it over to Jerry Fujimoto, who is our Youth Development Supervisor. But it looks like we have a question from Councilmember.
Through the chair, don't we need to vote on the proclamation? Or it says declare, don't we have, or do we have to?
No.
Who declares? No, the mayor declares.
Yes.
Thank you for that. Thank you.
Fine question.
Yeah.
And then a good segue into our next item on the agenda, which is recognition of Youth Advisory Council 2005-2006 scholarship recipients. Do I have that correct? Okay.
Yeah, actually, the next 2 items, I'm going to let Jerry Fujimoto, Youth Development Supervisor, speak to the council on that and take it from there. Jerry?
Mr. Mayor and council members, it's my privilege each year to be working with our Youth Advisory Council, the young people of our community, the future leaders of San Carlos. And they have a scholarship for community service, significant community service that they give out every year. And the criteria is that the students must be a resident of San Carlos or the 94070 zip code area. They must have been a current junior or senior in high school at the time of application. They must have a GPA of 3.0 or higher, and they must have 1 letter of recommendation. The funds that are raised for the scholarships is done by the Youth Advisory Council through their monthly middle school dances. So the kids raise all the money for this scholarship. This year, the Youth Council chose 3 worthy students, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about them. 2 of them are here tonight. One is in Taiwan visiting her mother. One is Janny Sun. She comes from Menlo Atherton High School. And right now she's in Taiwan visiting her mom. English is her second language, and she excelled so quickly in her high school, that she was given many accolades at her high school at Menlo Atherton. She also volunteers at Stanford Hospital. She volunteered in her post office in Taiwan. She's a key club member in Menlo Atherton, and she is a Gold Award candidate for Girl Scouts. So that's Janny's son. Our second scholarship recipient is Heather Nelson from Carmon High School. Heather, can you please come up? Heather has been a Healthy City tutor on one of our noted programs here in San Carlos and mentor for 4 years. She has volunteered as a science camp counselor. She's created and designed an organic garden for Charles Armstrong School. She's the co-founder of the Swinging Scots Dance Club and the Girls Ultimate Frisbee Club. She says that initiating your own community service project is not only fun and creative, but also a way for you to contribute to your community in a way that fits your own personal style. Mr. Mayor, Heather Nelson. Our third and final scholarship recipient this year just blew me out of the water. I didn't know people like this existed, and especially at such a young age. Our third recipient is Marina Gatto, and she comes from Mercy High School, and her bio was, I kid you not, 5 pages long. She had this huge bio of all these things that she did, and I'm going to read a little bit something that was written for Marina. As accomplished and passionate activist since the age of 8 years old, Marina Gatto is a constant fixture in the media as a spokesperson and leader for the LGBT community. As a child of 2 lesbian moms, Ramona and Arzu Gatto, Marina educates people nationwide about LGBT families and their children and about the pride that she has in her family and in her community. Marina is an inspiration for youth of the LGBT community, for youth nationwide, and is a voice for the LGBT families and is a leader of that community. She is helping change the landscape of society, educating nationally on the importance of equality for all people, all families, and all children through her tireless activism. She states that she has learned through her service that each of us has the power to make great change. We must never combat hate with hate. Instead, educate, love, and lead by example. She submitted a long list of accomplishments, TV appearances, magazine articles, athletic achievements, and awards. To highlight just 2 of them, of most note, Marina was instrumental in helping Assembly Bill 205, the Domestic Partner Rights and Responsibilities Act, pass in 2003. She played an integral part in the great success of Assembly Bill 19, the Marriage Non-Discrimination Act, in 2005. She has with her tonight San Mateo County Supervisor Rich Gordon here in support of her. Mr. Mayor, I give you Marina Gatto. Those were our college recipients. We're going to move on to recognition of Youth Advisory Council. Consideration of appointing 2006-2008.
Jerry, Supervisor has a presentation.
Oh, I'm sorry, sir.
Thank you, Jerry, and thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. First of all, let me commend this city for your youth development work. We have had, in the last several years in the county, a youth development initiative trying to make sure that we uplift the positive assets that our young people can bring and contribute in community. And quite frankly, this city is the leader in that effort. No other city in this county can match what you do. And Jerry in particular, on the staff level, has just been outstanding. So I want to first congratulate you as a city and the leadership of this council for your youth development efforts and the commitment that you make through your Parks and Recreation Department to that. I also want to congratulate the young people who participate in the Youth Commission here, the Youth Advisory Council. Congratulate the 3 scholarship winners tonight. I have had the privilege and honor of working with Marina Gatto, and so on this particular occasion, I wanted to come and to specifically congratulate her. I know personally of her work and of her efforts, and I wanted to present this resolution to her from the Board of Supervisors. So, Marina.
We are now going to consider the appointment of the 2006-2008 Youth Advisory Council members, and then after that we will recognize the retiring YAC voting members. Tonight, there are 5 new voting members for 4 new for 2006-2008 and 1 for 2006-2007. For the term of 2006-2007, we have Matt Taylor from Carlmont High School. Come on up, Matt. and stand right there. We have for 2006-2008 Tyler Likens from Sarah High School, two-year term. We have Aaron Busina, sorry Aaron, from Carlmont High School. We have Jordan Robb, St. Francis High School. And we have Lauren Vogel from St. Charles School, who is on a soccer tournament right now, so she's sorry she cannot be here. So these are the 4 new voting members. You have Richard Carpenter and Kristen Wilshire is here tonight as your remaining council members. And are you going to swear them in?
Yes.
Okay.
Does the council need to vote? Do they need
Yes,
to vote on their
they need to
appointments?
vote on
Okay.
them, yeah.
You need to vote first.
Okay, I would entertain a motion to approve these new advisory council
I would make a motion to
members.
approve the new members of the Youth Advisory Council and to reappoint the folks that are returning.
And do we have a second?
Second?
We have a motion, we have a second. Roll call?
Councilmember Grisilli?
Yes?
Councilmember Davids?
Yes.
Councilmember Lewis?
Yes.
Councilmember Teagle Doherty is absent. Mayor Grocott?
Yes.
I'm going to swear you all into your new offices. If you can please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear that you will bear true faith and allegiance to the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of California, that you take this obligation freely, without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion, and that you will well and faithfully discharge the duties upon which you are about to enter? Okay. If we have a little paperwork over here for you.
I'm so lucky I get to work with them every single day. The retiring members, there's a number of them that are retiring, and they're all over the place right now. This was vacation time, but I just wanted to highlight them because some of them are watching this on TV, or they got on the internet. Jillian Holden is retiring, and she was on council for 4 years, and out of that 2 years, she was council chair. She has been on the council as a voting member in good standing, and she's a great individual. She just graduated from Notre Dame High School, and she's moving on to her college career at San Jose State. So we'll be missing Jillian. Samantha Rolendi is at a softball tournament in Colorado right now, and Sam was our secretary for 2 years, and she is a junior at Notre Dame High School right now. Gary Dufault, come on up, Gary. Gary is retiring, and he has been on council for 3 years as a voting member. And where are you going to school next year? Carlmont High School. So Gary is retiring right now. And Tamar Busina is also retiring. It's a family legacy. Aaron is her younger brother. And she was on the council for 2 years, and during that time, she was the historian for the council and also the public relations officer. And both of them are retiring in good standing. To be excused at this time.
Yes, you may be excused. Thank you very much. Oh, yes. No. Unless you want to take a break. Okay, while they are exiting the chambers, our next item on the agenda is public comment, which is, we have an allowance for 10 minutes right now for public comment for items not on the posted agenda. If there's something you would like to speak on, not on the posted agenda, 2 minutes per speaker, and I have one speaker card right now, Pat Bell.
Well, I want to comment on a couple things that are actually on the agenda but didn't have room for public comment. Parks and Rec Month is July, and our fields are closed, which strikes me as odd. Be nice if Parks and Rec Month were a month when a family could go to the park and have a picnic and have a pickup game of Frisbee or whatever, but that can't happen because the fields are closed. Seems ironic to me. And it was noted that Marina is an inspiration to youth. She's an inspiration to me, and I'm not youth, long ways from youth. And I hope that we will recognize the other GLBT members of our community. I noticed a real absence at Hometown Days Parade. There was no rainbow flag. There were no, and I asked Marina about it, and she said, gee, I don't know, maybe we should do that. And I said, yeah, maybe we should. I'm sure that there are other people in our community who would like to be recognized as part of our community. And Marina's so outstanding that you can't miss her, but the rest of them may also be doing things that we haven't heard about.
Thank you. And I see no other members of the public wishing to speak, so we will move on to item 7, which is approval of the consent calendar. The consent calendar will be approved by one motion unless anyone from staff, the council, or the public would like to have an item discussed separately, in which case it will move to under item 9, which is new business. Would anybody from staff like to have an item pulled?
We have none.
None? And from council?
No.
No? And I do have speaker cards for items 7G, H, and K by Pat Bell. So I'm assuming she wants to have those discussed separately. Is that correct, Pat? Okay, so we will hold off on those items. That again was 7G, H, and K. So I would entertain a motion for items A through F and item I and J.
Mr. Mayor, I'll move approval of A through F, I, and J, including D, which is adopting Ordinance 1373 of the San Carlos Municipal Code, Chapter 3.08, revisions to warrant procedures.
Second the motion.
Okay, Vice Mayor Davids made the motion. It was seconded by Mr. Grisilli to approve items A through F, item I and J, keeping in mind that item D is an ordinance. Roll call.
Councilmember Davids?
Yes.
Councilmember Grisilli?
Yes.
Councilmember Lewis?
Yes?
And Mayor Grocott?
Yes. Okay, and we will entertain items G, H, and K, like I said earlier, under new business. That brings us to a public hearing, which is item 8A, consideration of adopting a draft negative declaration and introducing a draft ordinance amending San Carlos Municipal Code, Chapter 18140, regulating parking within the city of San Carlos. We have our planning director, Liz Cullinan.
Good evening, Mayor Grocott, members of the council, and members of the San Carlos community. It's been about a year since we started this effort We sort of started on a large scale, and now we're ending up in terms of some code changes that we're asking your consideration of. We started the process of looking at updating the city's parking ordinance through a series of 2 community-wide meetings. Let me just make sure this gets up here first. Both hosted by the Traffic and Transportation Commission, as well as the San Carlos Police Department, Planning Department, and City Engineer's Office. That started with the circulation element, as I mentioned, and also the Traffic and Transportation Commission on January 18th held a citywide meeting to discuss the concepts of updating the city's parking ordinance. At that point, they weren't looking at any specific changes, but looking at concepts. Additionally, the City Council adopted a work program which directed the staff to update the city's parking ordinance. In order to do that, we updated the city's parking survey. As you may recall, in 1999, Hexagon Transportation conducted a downtown parking survey and found that there were vacancies in the city's parking plazas around the downtown. The city staff in-house conducted another update of that study and found that indeed there was about a 50% surplus of parking in the downtown parking lots, the public plazas. As I mentioned, the Traffic and Transportation reviewed the concepts twice, and the Planning Commission reviewed the concepts incorporated in your staff report as well as a draft ordinance on June 5th of 2006. In terms of public outreach, which is something we'll get into later this evening as another agenda item, staff conducted additional public outreach other than that's required by the San Carlos Municipal Code and by state law. We provided a detailed public notification letter which outlined the specific changes that were being discussed. We provided a mailing to downtown tenants as well as property owners. Again, that's above and beyond what the state law requires, as well as the Muni Code. We provided a clip on Channel 27 to get people interested in the topic. We created a website section, and we provided some press releases to several local newspapers. I'll categorize the concepts, the change concepts, into 3 distinct categories, the first being changes to the parking requirements, the second being changes to design standards, and the third being changes to the exception process, or I should say creating an exception process. The city doesn't have a formal exception process at this point in time. In terms of the changes to parking requirements, we're asking that you consider first relaxing the parking standards in the downtown area, and that would involve 2 components. One is to change the parking standards in what we call the Central Retail Core District from 1 parking space for every 300 square feet of gross floor area to 1 parking space for every 500 square feet of gross floor area. And again, that would be accommodated under the vacancies that we confirmed in the downtown parking study. Also to look at relaxing parking standards for affordable housing in the downtown area. For 1 parking space for each unit of affordable housing. It's currently an average of 2 parking spaces for each unit. We're also looking at providing clear requirements for instructional facilities, laboratories, hospitals, and medical offices. We currently don't have any parking standards for those types of facilities, and the proposed ordinance would create specific standards for those, so there was no ambiguity as we get those proposals in. In addition to changing the parking requirements, we believe that managing parking is equally as important so you don't have overflow parking impacts to surrounding neighborhoods. One example of something we've done recently is posted sort of an advertisement on the city's website and are working with the Chamber of Commerce to advertise the public parking plazas, which are sometimes hidden or not well signed and do in fact have these vacancies. The second component of change that we're asking your consideration for are the design requirements. And we're looking at changes to require now stormwater pollution prevention measures into parking lots, for example, to require landscaping in parking lots, to allow tandem parking, therefore using less land and paving less area, allowing or requiring pedestrian paths within parking lots, again, breaking up the paved area and being more pedestrian friendly for new development, and finally to allow some parking for larger development projects to be satisfied through motorcycle parking. The final category that we're asking your consideration for are exceptions. Again, we don't have a formal exception process. It's difficult to navigate through the code currently, so we're outlining a specific exception section in the parking chapter. The categories of exceptions that we're looking at are first conversions of garages into living space with a series of findings, and that is proposed as being processed through a discretionary process, a conditional use permit process. Secondly, that we allow exceptions, consideration of exceptions. All of these exceptions, with the exception of the ADA requirements and the parking space standards, would be processed on a discretionary basis, a case-by-case basis with a public hearing. Getting back to the transit-oriented development, that would be another candidate for an exception, and that would be classified as development within 1/3 mile of a rail station. Also considering exceptions for screened or underground parking areas, and finally for parking lifts. And the conditional use permit process that I mentioned would allow for consideration and sensitivity to surrounding land uses. For example, the difference between residential and commercial parking areas. There may be different kinds of issues such as noise, screening, et cetera. And then, as I mentioned, the Americans with Disability requirements could be processed administratively under the draft ordinance, as well as some minor discrepancies or variances in parking space standards, such as backup distance, width, and height under parking spaces. Those, again, could be processed administratively by the staff without a public hearing. In order for the council to adopt the proposed ordinance, you do need to consider the draft negative declaration that we've prepared. We wanted to examine the issue of any potential environmental impacts associated with the changes proposed, specifically in relation to relaxing the parking standards in the downtown area. Upon completing our initial review, we found that the proposal would not have a significant negative environmental impact because it does incorporate stormwater pollution prevention measures and smart growth measures, namely providing incentives for development near transportation. And also the proposal does not involve changes in density or approval of specific development projects. Those projects would still need to be considered in terms of their environmental impacts. With that, staff is recommending that the City Council adopt the draft negative declaration and introduce the ordinance on the required findings listed in your staff report, and I would be happy to answer any questions that you have at this point.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Cullinan. Any questions for staff? Yes? Okay. Why don't we start over here with Brad, and we'll move this direction.
My first question, and again, for those who want to follow along, in the staff report is on page 4, item number 7, where we talk about minimum parking requirements for medical office space, 3.5 parking spaces per every 1,000 square feet. My question is, currently with the PAMF draft environmental impact report, does this change the standards by which that environmental impact report was applied?
No, in fact, we were able to use that information, basically hot off the press, no charge to the city, to create parking requirements for hospitals and medical office buildings. We didn't have the information to show what the demand or need would be until the environmental impact report was done for the Palo Alto Medical Foundation project. So now that we have that information, and we do know the project is consistent with this as well, we thought we should use this information to set the standards.
Great. And just to clarify, I had to ask Mr. Weiss this afternoon on the phone, tandem parking, could you just define that for everybody? Because for me, I didn't know what it was.
It's basically parking one in front of the other, a parking space. So in order to, for the first car to exit, you would have to have the second car exit as well.
Great. Number 2, on page 5, this is about the conversion of garages into living space. On many of the East Side residences have some of these conversions. Do you know that if those developments fall within the standard where they were built before 54, is that right, or as of 54?
That is a good example of housing that would fall under that criteria, yes.
Great, thank you. In that same item, under C, item 1C, it says there are no negative parking conditions within the neighborhood. My only concern at reading that, and I guess what I'm wondering is there a reason why we don't have more specific language in what those negative conditions may be? In other words, I'm always a little concerned when there's broader language, because then there's broader interpretation, and then there's more time spent sort of clarifying. So I'm just curious as to whether or not you have any, why it might not be more specific criteria in that.
Well, believe it or not, it's actually more specific than most use permits. Use permits are very general. The use permit findings, for example, they would require that the decision maker, for example, find that there was no detriment to the community. So what we felt in this particular case was, because there are potential parking problems in some of the areas with the older homes, that we should specifically address the issue of neighborhood parking. It's difficult to say what would constitute a neighborhood parking problem, quote unquote, in a particular neighborhood, because they do vary so much. But between the professional opinion and expertise of the police department, the public works director, for example, and the neighborhood coming out, since it is a use permit process, those three pieces of input would provide information to substantiate whether or not there was a problem. And that's generally how we process.
And so the judgment for whether or not the negative condition exists would lie with staff, and would that also be a planning commission item, just a process question?
This is proposed as a zoning administrator use permit, so it would be the zoning administrator's determination to balance all of those interests and make a determination. It could go to the planning commission on appeal or the city council, but.
Great, thank you. On the parking lifts, item 5 of page 5, spending some time in the East Coast, I was just curious. There wasn't necessarily a definition whether or not they're interior parking lifts or exterior, outdoor parking lifts or indoor. And I know on the East Coast, some of the outdoor parking lifts, just for my own personal taste, they're a little bit unsightly. Is there any room to need more specific language about being, indoor versus outdoor? Or I'm sorry, let me let you respond to that.
Well, it's an excellent question because we have had proposals for both. And the staff position through the design review authority that we have for the outdoor lifts has been that we wouldn't support those. But that, again, is through the design review findings and our authority, the zoning authority for design review. It certainly wouldn't hurt to be more specific that the city would consider enclosed parking lifts with these findings. That is our intention.
Thank you. Those are my questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I may, if I could through the mayor, because we've got a balancing act going on here, I may sit down to answer any further questions. I have a few documents, so.
Very good. Yes. Vice Mayor Davids.
Yeah, Liz, I just want to clarify a few things. In terms of the reduction to in retail, I assume this is for new construction, where we go from one space for 300 to one space for 500. So that applies in new construction?
No, it's not intended to apply to just new construction, but also changes in use.
So we have a few stores that are available on Laurel Street, and assuming it's the same use, would it have any impact, really? I suppose not.
It really wouldn't. It would. The impact would be mostly related to new development, expansion, or an intensification of use. So, for example, if you had a lower intensity use in an existing location and they wanted to create a greater intensity use, restaurant, that kind of a thing, that's where you would have the advantage.
Okay. All right. Thank you. And regarding on page 3, number 2, the affordable housing, you're suggesting we consider reducing parking requirements. Are you going to make a recommendation to a certain level, or is this an open issue for discussion during the planning or approval stage?
In attachment,
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
The first attachment, if you look at the draft ordinance, page 4, we are making a recommendation that under multifamily dwellings, the area indicated in bold italics is a relaxation of the standards for multifamily affordable housing within the Central Retail Core District.
Okay. All right. I missed that. Thank you. Then back to the lifts. I see a lot of advantages in considering that, and I suppose there are areas where it could be quite successful. My concern would be over time if they don't work, or if people consider they're too much nuisance, they'll park on the street. And while we met the parking requirement, we really haven't, because we don't have a space. We have a lift, and for one reason or another, it just doesn't get used. Is there any enforcement attached to this so that it has to be operating at all time? Any inspection? How would you intend to handle that?
Yes, inspection and a requirement. Our thought is a requirement in the CC&Rs, for example, for a new condominium development, or a condition of approval in the entitlement certificates that would require ongoing operation of those lifts.
So if they didn't keep them going and keep them operational, what's the recourse?
It would be a code enforcement issue. It's a difficult issue because obviously the development has been approved with those lifts, and either they'd have to come back for an amendment, there'd have to be a parking, sort of a neighborhood parking study done to see whether or not existence of the development without those parking spaces could actually work and not provide an impact. And that was our thought in terms of having the council consider it, is that it should be discretionary because there are maintenance issues. The life of the willingness of tenants to use those on a regular basis. We have some information in the packet that we've provided to you, and we've had a lot of promotional pitches on how well they work and how easy they are to operate and how everybody uses them, but they certainly are worth considering on a case-by-case basis, in our opinion.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Griselli?
Well, Councilmember Lewis and Vice Mayor Davids took most of the good questions, but I have one quick one. Councilmember Lewis asked you about item 7 on page 4, which was about the, I guess, the hospital or the whatever it is, the medical. I had the same question on 6. I just assume, I don't want to assume, that 6 and 7 were both included with Palo Alto Medical Foundation.
And I'm sorry, you're looking at the staff report page?
I'm sorry, the staff report, page 4, item 6. Sorry.
Oh, thank you. So your question is whether or not the Palo Alto Medical Foundation project would meet the proposed standards?
Well, what is it? Do they know about it? Is it included in there? It's
Yes.
all set. They're not screaming and yelling, going, "Oh wow, wait a minute, what happened here?"
No, their primary concern was that we don't have it be a maximum, or it was a minimum. There are transportation demand measures or ways to reduce traffic through having reduced parking requirements, and they wanted to make sure that if the council for some reason wanted to have reduced parking requirements on certain projects, including that project, I suppose is why they brought it up, that this ordinance wouldn't prohibit that. And the ordinance wouldn't through exception processes. The Palo Alto Medical Foundation project, for example, is being processed as a planned community, which means it can have its own parking standards, its own development standards. So I think that was their main concern, was it didn't allow for flexibility. But it was not a big concern.
Okay.
They know that they're consistent with this. They don't feel it's an issue. They just wanted to make sure that
I want to make sure they're aware of it. I mean,
they are very aware of it, yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes.
I forgot to say, but it's clear in all the documentation that we got that traffic transportation, the planning commission, you and the planning staff have put just a ton of effort and work into this. And in reading through the minutes from all of those, from those meetings, there's been great questions about all of these things and a lot of considered effort over time. And I just want to say thank you and commend your staff and the commissions for doing the work that they do on this, because it's a nice comprehensive look at the problem. And although it took a while to read through all of it, it certainly was great work. So I just wanted to say I think we all, I probably speak for the council, but it's great effort and I appreciate from all.
Thank you. We'll pass that along to our commissions.
To the mayor.
Yes.
One other question, Liz, in terms of the survey, for the historical record, can you give us an idea of when the survey was done and what kind of dates were included?
The survey was done both during the week and on the weekends, and it was done during non-holiday periods as well. We wanted to specifically avoid Thanksgiving, for example. So it was done during average times and not holiday times.
So the listing that we have, I can just refer to it. You talk about location along the top line, and then 9 to 11. I guess that's 9 a.m. to 11 a.m.
That's correct.
Okay. And if you did this more than once, did you average then the results, or did you go to each plaza or each location one time and make the count?
The results were averaged, I believe. I'd need to confirm that, but I believe they were averaged because we did do them a number of times.
Okay,
Yes.
fine. Very good. Thank you. And the timing again, was it this year?
It was the end of last year. The end of last year.
End of last year.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I have a few questions when you're ready. The first one I have is on the garage conversions. And the first question has to do with, I'm in the staff report, page 5, or if you care, on page 9 of the ordinance itself. Item A there, the residence was constructed prior to 1954. help me out here. I'm trying to understand the logic on pinning that requirement or finding, if you will.
The logic behind that is that before 1954, there were no requirements for parking spaces on site. No parking requirements, no garage requirements. So therefore, you're really not increasing a non-conforming situation, or you're creating a non-conforming situation. In essence, these homes did not have a required garage. They may have opted for a garage, but they weren't required to have a garage.
Okay. So you're not increasing technically a non-conforming, what did you call that? Non-conforming situation.
Condition.
Okay. All right, got it. All right. And then on item D, I had a couple of questions there. First one, I suppose what we're pointing at is it says the garage area is no more than 10 by 30, and I would take that to mean actually the garage dimensions are no more than 10 feet by 30 feet?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So we might want to take a look at that language later. And we're talking inside clear dimensions?
Yes.
Okay. So that's a yes. And then, again, if you could just speak to the how these figures of 10 feet and 30 feet were arrived at.
The goal behind those dimensions were to, again, accommodate the older homes that didn't have two-car garages. So this dimension would not eliminate a two-car garage. In other words, it wouldn't create a tremendous amount of new living area.
Okay. What about the 30 feet, though? I just don't...
That was something that was proposed through the L'Oreal Association. They felt that because of the additional depth, for example, that it is in some of the non-conforming garages where you can have washers, dryers, water heaters, that kind of a thing, they wanted to include those deeper garages as well.
To have this allowance as a finding?
Yes.
Yes, okay. All right. Okay, very good. And then the other item I had is on page, I guess it's the first page of the draft ordinance, item D, all this language that's crossed out. It says that at the time of erection or enlargement of any building containing one or more dwelling units, or of the addition of one or more dwelling units to or within an existing building, so forth. And it's saying that you don't, or this language actually is saying that you will have additional parking to accommodate the new units, not less than 2 automobile garage spaces and so forth. And that stood out to me because of second units in residential areas. Would that apply? So if you have a home and then you want to either convert an existing space or build new space that would be considered for a second unit, how would the parking be dealt with in that case? Because I remember we went through that pretty extensively when we went through the allowances for having second units, and it was a matter of of debate and discussion at that time for the council.
That the parking requirements for second units is listed specifically in the second dwelling unit chapter of the zoning code. Additionally, for new homes, the EDCC has some discretion for additions to require additional parking spaces. So both of those kinds of situations have some discretionary opportunity for the city to either require or waive parking. So that's why we felt this section was not appropriate, since it, as a standard, required additional parking for all enlargements or additions, and that's not the way the rest of the code reads.
So if we were to pass things as they're written now, we would be moving from a position we took as a council a couple of years ago to require additional parking for a second unit to allowing more discretion by staff on whether the parking would actually be required. Am I reading?
No, you'd really be making the code consistent, internally consistent. Right now, this section D is not consistent with the second dwelling unit ordinance or the EDCC regulations. for new additions.
Oh, because the current second unit ordinance, yeah, I think you're looking that up, right?
That's correct. But
Yeah,
the
so I'll
current
give
second
you-
dwelling unit ordinance has its own parking requirements and processes, and the same is with the residential additions, single-family residential additions.
Okay, all right,
I'll check that for you.
okay. So in other words, there shouldn't be a concern there,
No, it
I don't think.
would be appropriate to cross-reference in the chart that we've proposed, the 18140, I believe it's 050, something about second dwelling units in there and cross-referencing the second dwelling unit ordinance. But again, that section D would be inconsistent with existing code regulations right now.
Okay, I think I follow you on that. Are you still looking something up? I have another question. I don't want to trample on you.
Go ahead, I can multitask.
You can, okay. I can't, but all right. Not very well anyways. On page 4 of the actual ordinance, a couple of items there. Again, I think one is just simply a typo. If you read down to about the middle of the page under item 2A, it says a garage or carport, so forth and so on, not less than 10 feet in width by 20 feet in width. And
I'm sorry, which page?
on page 4 of the actual ordinance,
So I
Draft-
can't multitask, apparently.
draft ordinance.
All right.
Aha, caught you. Page 4, about a little more than halfway down the page, under item 2A.
The ordinance version with the strike-throughs or no strike-throughs?
No strike-throughs.
Okay.
There's item 2A, just a little bit beyond middle of the page, and it says at the end of the sentence, not less than 10 feet in width by 20 feet in width.
Oh, yeah,
So probably one of those should be
that's
the
good. That's
length.
existing code language, but
Oh,
we'll
okay.
clean that up too.
Oh, all right. We'll clean that up then. So this is all existing code language.
Anything that's not bolded is
Oh,
existing.
I misunderstood this then, because I thought when I read this, all the bold stuff on the previous pages were being taken out, struck out, and then all the new stuff was on pages 3 and 4.
If you go, attachment 1 is sort of the clean ordinance as being proposed.
Yeah.
Attachment 2, and sometimes this causes confusion, but a lot of times the Planning Commission, for example, likes to see the thought process that went into creating the clean
Right.
ordinance. Everything that's struck through is eliminated in attachment 1. So anything you see that has a strike through it in attachment 2 is not included in attachment 1.
Oh, okay. Well, let me ask my question anyways, because you cleaned one thing up. Maybe this will clean up something else since we're looking at it. On that same page, page 4, towards just before the bottom, it talks about items may be added, so forth. The sentence I'm looking at, a garage door opening of at least 8 feet 6 inches per parking space shall be provided. And I was curious about that on two regards. Now you're telling me this is existing language anyways, but I have seen developments done where they get garage doors down to even 7 feet, keeping in mind that most vehicles are 5 to 5.6 wide. And I guess while I was looking at this as new language, I didn't want to create something that I even checked my place, and it's the garage door is 8 feet for each of the spaces. So creating something that would cause non-conforming, legal non-conforming situations, and also if 8.6 is necessary. And then the other question that came to mind, or the thought that came to mind, is the way it reads. A garage door opening of at least 8.6 per parking space shall be provided. If you had 2 parking spaces, it might lead one to believe you had to have a garage door 17 feet wide, and oftentimes in residential construction, many of the garage doors for 2-car garages are 15 feet wide, and so I was concerned about that just a little bit.
It's certainly an opportunity to clean up existing language, even if we haven't highlighted it. There is a proposed section in the draft ordinance on page 3, subsection G, which talks about administrative interpretations that staff can make for minor changes.
I'm sorry, where were you again?
If
Page?
you go to page 3 of attachment 1, subsection G. It's under 020.
Oh,
We have incorporated an opportunity for,
may grant minor exceptions. Is that-
Exactly.
Yeah, uh-huh.
so that could cover that, but certainly this language could be cleaned up as well.
Okay. All right. Well, those are all my questions, and we can discuss these items. After we take any more questions, we'll take comments from the public because this is a public hearing. So I've got 2 speaker cards on this item, actually 3 from one person, but it's still item 8A, so you're covered with one of these. Pat Bell and Scott Marsters.
And if I could, through the mayor, just to close on responding to your questions, the second dwelling unit ordinance does have parking requirements in it, so you could cross-reference if you like, but this would make it consistent with existing regulations.
Okay, thank you very much. You want to concede to your president, or do you want to come up and? Okay.
Pat
And if you
Bell,
could, Pat,
San Carlos.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
What? You want me to tell you who I am?
No, you did that, but when you speak on the items, if you could page reference as we were doing.
Right.
Yeah, that would be helpful.
I hope I brought it with me up here. Okay. Surprise, surprise, I want to talk about handicap parking. I assume that an ADA exception means that they want to allow less handicap parking than the ADA requires. And is that correct? No? What is an ADA exception then?
Go ahead, I'll
Go
let you
ahead.
finish, and then
Yeah.
I can respond.
Finish all your questions and comments.
I don't think there's enough handicap parking in downtown San Carlos. And when I asked Liz about it some time ago, she said, well, park in the alley. There's lots of parking in the alley. Well, as Councilmember Davids can now tell you, there's a huge difference between parking in a handicapped space, getting up on the sidewalk and going into the business you're approaching, and parking in the alley and having to walk maybe a block to get around the businesses or through or whatever to get where you're going on uneven, cracked, sloped pavement. So parking in the alley is not the same as handicap parking spaces on Laurel Street if you want to go to a business or a restaurant. I don't think there are enough of them down there. If you think that you don't want to set aside that valuable space on Laurel just for handicap parking, you could make it a 12-minute space. That way, when someone wants to just dash into Starbucks, they won't be using the handicapped space, which they now do, to dash into Starbucks. They could use the 12-minute space. And if I get there first, my handicap parking placard, I can park as long as I want to because I'm not restricted by the 12 minutes. So that would be one way to...
Excuse me, I want to make sure I understand you. You're saying to somehow designate the handicap parking space as a dual-use space, 12 minutes?
Well, leave the handicapped parking spaces you have now, but add spaces. If you don't want to have 2 handicap spaces per block, one at each end, like Burlingame does, which is what I would love to have, then those spaces are sitting empty and people are saying, well, you know, they're wasted spaces. If you had 12-minute spaces, many cities have 12-minute or 24-minute spaces, and so the general public can use those for quick trips, but then if a handicapped placard user parks in it, he or she can park in it as long as necessary because we're allowed to use those spaces without regard to the time limit. So I would like to see more handicap parking spaces on Laurel Street in front of the businesses that I want to visit because, you know, the one in the alley doesn't do me much good because it's not on the way to any place. I forget the name of the business that it's attached to, but it's not something that I've ever visited. And if I want to go to Saffron, for instance, Saffron Bistro, which is one of our favorite restaurants, the handicap space is close to that, but then the curb at the back of Saffron is about this high. So that's, Councilmember Davids can tell you that there's a huge difference between a curb this high and a curb this high. It really makes a difference. And now that the staff has told us that we have way too many parking spaces downtown, way too many, we should be able to turn some of them over to handicapped people, I think. And I'd also like to comment on the methodology. When they looked at parking, they looked, for instance, at the block that's Laurel, San Carlos, El Camino, and whatever the other end is. And I'd rather see them look at both sides of Laurel in that first block. You know, what's the parking for the first block of Laurel? Because if there are parking spaces available on El Camino and you want to go to a restaurant on Laurel, you're not going to look at those parking spaces on El Camino. You're going to say there's nowhere to park to go to this restaurant. And when you lump the public parking spaces and the private parking spaces together and say, well, we have plenty of parking spaces, that doesn't mean you have plenty of parking spaces for someone who wants to go downtown and park and eat in a restaurant, because some of those that aren't being used are in private lots where you're not allowed to park. So I think it could be, you can drill down in the report and see what that information is, but when you just get the summary that says we have plenty of parking, no problem, I don't think you get the accurate picture. And I think we should be concerned about having enough parking for that person who wants to go downtown and spend money, because that's what we're trying to accomplish here. So more handicap parking and parking for people who are going to come and spend money. Thank you.
Thank you. Liz, you wanted to respond to some of the one of her questions? And if you could also, I'm sorry, if you could also, if you wish to comment on the methodology to us in response to her comment, that'd be great.
The proposed ordinance actually makes it easier. Keep in mind, the proposed ordinance deals with private property and not public property. But the proposed ordinance makes it easier to have handicap parking spaces for private development. Right now, it's almost impossible, since you need more area to have a handicap parking space. You then have to go forward for a parking exception if you don't meet your parking requirements. Right now, we're suggesting if you need to eliminate a parking space in order to provide a handicap parking space or two, that it can be done administratively rather than going through a costly process. The other issue of Laurel Street, Ms. Bell is correct. That is really, that's what we're talking about when we're talking about parking management. We're talking about people getting used to being able to park in a variety of places. That may not apply necessarily to specific people that have disabilities, but in general, it's an opportunity to use the downtown parking as a whole. And it's true that if you drive down Laurel Street, you'll see that it's maximized at certain hours. But if you look at it as a whole, and you look at some parking management opportunities and educational opportunities, signage opportunities, that you do have some vacant parking that can be used should the council choose to do that.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Marsters.
Hi, my name is Scott Marsters, Cherry Street in San Carlos. And what I'd like to ask you to do is to consider removing from the exceptions to the parking ordinance the transit-oriented development or development located within a third of a mile of the rail station. And
so, excuse me, Scott, you're on page 5, I believe.
I have
the new bold language.
I have the Planning Commission report, so
yeah.
I guess it's page 5 of
yeah.
that, and it's C, section C, number 2. And the issues I have with this is the real concern I have is that the major transit-oriented development that's coming along is the development of the railroad properties. And since there are ongoing issues with the existing railroad properties, such as the continued parking problems along McHugh, we still have issues with shuttles. In fact, we had to get the police involved again recently to ask the drivers to turn off their engines because they've been sitting there for longer than the time limit and, you know, spewing all that exhaust into the neighborhoods, which now have their windows open. And also the fact that Caltrain has, since the advent of the baby bullets, has really started treating the local stops along the Caltrain corridor as second-class citizens, because if you're on a baby bullet, if you're on a regular local train and the trains break down, the baby bullets actually go around you and don't stop to help you. So you're sitting there waiting, and the baby bullets go around you because those passengers are much more valuable to Caltrain than the local stops are. So local stops have become second-class citizens to Caltrain.
Excuse me, I'm having a hard time, maybe the council is too. How does that, what you just said, how does that impact parking and what we're looking at?
Because the individuals who are using Caltrain are actually, you're giving them an exception for transit-oriented development, okay? So as part of transit-oriented development, you're going to want more people to come into San Carlos, okay? And as part of transit-oriented development, you're going to have to deal with the fact that you have fewer and fewer stops in San Carlos during the commute hours, okay? So as part of the whole baby bullet thing, they've reduced the commute for the residents who live in San Carlos, okay? So it all ties into the transit-oriented development, and it appears as though you're in advance rewarding the transit-oriented development by giving them fewer parking standards, okay? And the concern is that they're going to start parking in the neighborhood, okay, which they already do. So my suggestion would be to have Caltrain and Samtrans, which owns that property, to solve the existing problems before you give them the possibility of an exemption to actually have lower parking standards, because they haven't solved the problems from the last situation that they had there. What's to stop them from potentially solving the existing issues as part of the next development, but then doing nothing to the new problems that are created out of the development that goes along the railroad properties?
If I can interrupt, I want to ask staff a question that relates to what you're pointing out. Because the Joint Powers Board is a little different, and the development there at the train property, I think, is we're treating that's essentially treated like a planned unit development. So would this exception necessarily apply to them, or is there a way, if we get into discussion, we want to follow Mr. Marsh's advice, is there a way we can not offer that exemption to that piece of property, but still allow it for buildings that are in our R3 district that are within a third of a mile of the train?
You really couldn't, because even if you took that exemption out of here, anybody, including Samtrans, could apply for a planned community rezoning with their own development standards. They'd go through the process of parking and traffic studies, et cetera, and the council could deny that at the end of the day. But that's a state law option that any developer would have. So whether we have it in here or not, this just basically makes a statement, a policy statement on the city's behalf, saying whether or not they want to encourage smart growth or development near transportation stations. And it's something that it's a bit of a chicken and egg type theory, where you need the density to develop the train schedules in a fashion that it starts to really work. So there's one issue that has to come before another, but that's the ultimate goal, is to create more people that are dependent on public transportation.
And a follow-up question to that is, having the language in here, is it, as Mr. Marster sees it, just opening the door to the development at the train having fewer parking spaces?
Not in our opinion, for two reasons. First, it's a discretionary approval. Again, it's a conditional use permit. And secondly, because it can happen now under the existing code. It's just a matter of formalizing the policy and, again, having the city and the council provide direction on what types of exceptions they think are appropriate.
Okay, thank you.
So the first point is that under before the baby bullets came along, the Caltrain used to stop here at least twice as often during commute hours, okay? So to build up the ridership is not really a way, the best way of looking at it, because they already made the stops. What they've done is they've cut back on those stops, okay? And in talking to Samtrans after they did the presentation for the Planning Commission, there is no intent to increase the number of stops in San Carlos during the commute hours. As far as, trying to think of what the other comments were. Would it be possible to deny the exemption, but then look at it on an individual basis? So if a transit-oriented development came forward and was not, say, the railroad property, which has created problems throughout the east side, were to come along and ask for an exemption, could you then approve that without giving the possibility of exemption to everybody?
Liz, would you like to speak to that? Because I don't think this is an automatic exemption.
That's correct. This is a case-by-case consideration, a public hearing process for any particular development project that wants an exception. So it doesn't mean it's a permitted outright exception. It simply means they're a candidate, and they can be heard before the zoning administrator with notification to the community.
It still seems to me that you're giving them something that they would have had to have asked for and would have had to have made some concessions in order to get without really them asking for it. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. And Council, I allowed these folks a little more time because there's only two. So I know it's a public hearing, and normally we keep it to 2 minutes. But okay, those are all the speaker cards for that item. So I would entertain a motion to close the public hearing.
So moved.
Second.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. None opposed. That brings us to a time for us to discuss this and decide how we want to move forward with it. Tom?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead. Vice Mayor Davids?
Well, basically, I like the recommendations by staff, and I think that that they're well taken. Commenting, however, on the public comment, Ms. Bell pointed out a couple of items kind of near and dear to my heart these days. Handicap parking has been something that I have appreciated much more than I ever thought I would. However, my time has come to a close, but there's a whole world of people out there that are afflicted and can't move around as they would choose and perhaps need special help. I'm not sure whether that's really a subject for this hearing. However, while we were on the subject, I would like to suggest that we agendize for some discussion at a future time our handicap parking situation downtown, and perhaps we could survey it. Maybe it's not quite what it should be. Spaces could be designated in other locations to better serve those who are dependent upon those spaces. So putting that aside, I think that I go to Mr. Marster's suggestions regarding transit-oriented development and parking. I really think what we're doing here is encouraging TOD, and I think that there's enough approval process in the way of seeing something built to where it gets a strong hearing and everything gets fleshed out pretty well. So I like the idea of having something in the ordinance that does that and would favor keeping it in. And I think that that's the only comments I have at this point. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Grisilli.
Well, I concur with Vice Mayor David's comments about the handicap parking also. I certainly would like to see an agenda item on it, and we seem to always have surveys of all the cities of this, that, and the other, of what other cities do in the peninsula, and I can't believe it would be that difficult to find out what the other cities do. Ms. Bell indicated Burlingame has one at each block, or an end of each block. I quite honestly thought we did too, but perhaps I'm mistaken. And just to get an idea of what we have relative to the rest of the communities around us. Again, as to Mr. Marster's comment, I think staff has indicated that these are just, every item that's going to be in here has to be discussed individually. It's not a hard and fast rule law type situation. We're giving, especially for transit-oriented developments, and if Samtrans/Caltrain/ whatever they are, JPA, come in with a development for the property north of Holly, I, for one, would certainly love to talk to them about what they're doing currently to make sure you obviously can't have necessarily hand-in-glove their situation, but I would certainly like to make sure that they're aware of the situation, and if they haven't provided help for us before, hopefully they can alleviate those situations to encourage us to look very favorably on their new development. So I think there's a lot of things that could be done with or without this document that I would certainly entertain to do. I think this document, as Mr. Lewis said also earlier, was painstakingly developed by many people, and I would also like to echo his comments about thanking staff and the other commissions. We always get to vote on these things, but there are enormous amount of hours and time that people put into them to do all the heavy lifting, and I certainly appreciate that, and I think I'm prepared at this point to support the proposal.
Again, just to weigh in on a couple of those issues, I like Ms. Bell's solution, if possible, 12-minute or 24-minute parking zones that, if a handicapped parking, insignia or sign allows one to be able to park there for longer, that's a good way to maybe get a couple of good uses and manage that situation. So I think that's an interesting suggestion. And I do, as we, our population, it's always aging. We're always in different situations. It's disabled population as well as an aging population. It is difficult to get around. Having a father who's 81 and a mother who's 76, it's tough to park near the restaurants, and it's tough to get up on those high curbs. So I also hope staff, we can also listen to some of those high curb comments. Maybe we should take a look at some of those things and see if they're if there's anything we should do about those things. But I would encourage us for us to sort of lead, if we can, in the Bay Area in some of these the handicap parking areas, or these as suggested, that the one that we get a dual purpose out of, I think is a great solution. On the transit-oriented development parking regulations, I think Vice Mayor Davids is correct. It's something general we do want to encourage. So it can be a positive thing for that area. I am really concerned about the parking congestion in those blocks of the east side that are within that third of a mile of the train station. I think already they're impacted by the industrial that's in that area, and as everybody knows, we've got sort of a delicate balance with residential right on top of industrial, and now right on top of the transit-oriented development. So I don't know if it's worth considering language to help us adjudicate that area. For me, anything that's adjacent to the residential on the east side there for transit-oriented development, I think we should discourage lessening those parking standards just from the impact on those neighborhoods alone. Already with garages that don't accommodate cars in many of those residences, the streets are packed with cars. There's a lot of cut-through in that particular region. There's a lot of cut-through traffic because, as opposed to the northern half of the east side where the streets don't all go all the way through, there's cut-through on these streets. So we're sort of having multiple level problems in this particular area. So personally, I don't know if we want to embed it or not with some discouraging east side adjacent to residential in the transit area, but I would certainly entertain that idea, if not a sort of the spirit of how these things are applied as we move forward.
Okay. So are you suggesting some change in the language under that item?
Let me ask a question of staff. Is there, in just becoming more familiar with the way draft ordinances are applied and where you want to have language particular to something or where you want more general language, you apply it in judgment. Would it be worth considering discussing like adjacent to residential on the east side in the transit area that we would discourage the relaxation of parking standards, or just ask you, Director Cullinan, from your experience?
I think the point is well taken in the sense that anything you can put out front and codify that you intend is the best way to approach anything, so there's not any sort of surprises for people that are developing. I think it's hard to address that in every situation, and I think probably the residential areas near the train station, closest to the train station, are the ones that are most impacted. We've done probably 2 to 4 years of study in that area with the police department and public works department. But as you go further east, for example, you don't have the same parking problems. It may be hard to craft language that would I think cover every concern. There may be situations where it might make sense, which is why we had the use permit process. But certainly you could have, for example, there is a clause in the industrial zoning section of the code that discourages office use, even though it allows for it on a conditional basis. So you could have some language like that that we could bring back to you during the adoption process if you're inclined to introduce it tonight.
Thank you. I'd like to hear my fellow council members, after Mayor Grocot's done with his comments, maybe what your thoughts and feelings are on something like
Okay.
that. I'd support something like that.
Okay, so that we
but-
have a...
Excuse me, and my only final comment would be, I would like to consider adding the word, maybe when it's brought to us the next time, of no exterior or outdoor parking lifts, and just relegate that to indoor parking lifts, just so we were clear about that one as well. We don't have to.
Okay. Yeah, let me get my comments out there, and then we can discuss back and forth on the items. Because I sat on the subcommittee of the council that dealt with building issues with, at the time, Councilmember Don Eaton, and we hashed back and forth on this garage conversion issue. And what we were after was primarily, in a lot of cases, we were concerned with trying to get people who have these already to come in and sort of turn themselves in, with the understanding that it would open the door for building to go in, look at any safety violations, and the one that Jack used, for instance, was being in one of these at one time it was being used as a bedroom, and the headboard of the bed was right up next to the water heater, which is a very dangerous situation. So his concern is being able to, like I say, encourage people to turn themselves in, as it were, and then that allows them to go in and clean up the safety violations, but still allow the planning violation, if you will, of even having converted your garage into a living space. And this change in the ordinance would allow that planning situation, if you will, that you could have a garage converted into living space, albeit it has to be safe. So that said, when I read item A, that's why I was asking staff about what was the logic. And the logic certainly makes sense, but I'm not sure it's needed. I'm not sure we need to put the onus on the property owner to, bring in some kind of documentation that shows their house was built prior to 1954. And in the long and short of it, why does it really matter if they have a garage that, as when Don and I were discussing this at ad hoc, was, you got a garage. It's not really usable because it's not large enough for a garage. You can't get your car in, open the door, and get out even. People see that situation for themselves, convert them to living spaces. It doesn't really matter when the house was built if you have that situation. And in some cases, and there are cases over there, I think, where houses were built afterwards, where they're right up against the lot line. In fact, they have 3-foot setbacks in some cases, not the typical 5. There's nowhere to go to add on to your garage to make it usable without tearing up your kitchen or some other part of your home. So I'm just not sure we need that 1954 date in there. And so I would suggest we strike that part of it. Otherwise, I'm happy with it, except I would say also on item B, it says the applicant can provide if the applicant can provide an alternative on-site parking space, that opens the door to this exception. And something else that we talked about, and I didn't see it in here, is then requiring the applicant to go through some kind of, maybe like the EDCC, to be sure that whatever they're proposing for off-street parking in their, what would be currently their yard and now a paved area, that it have some kind of aesthetic element to it. Maybe require brick pavers or something like that, so it's not just pouring an 8 by 20 slab of concrete that people would park on. So give that to the EDCC to control those and review those. Those are my comments. So what do we want to do with, first off, with Brad's language? And I understand your concern. The thing I was thinking when you were asking staff the question was possibly something that would say within a third of a mile, but west of the grade separation. I don't know if we can put that kind of language in there or not, but that might answer it.
Yeah, which I think to the south of it, though, there's still area that might not impact residential. That was my only concern. If you look at the map. In other words, to the south of the east side residential area, in the transit corridor, there might be some areas that could handle overflow parking if it had it.
I see.
That's the only reason I was thinking if we made language specific to the residential blocks.
Now, what you have drawn there, do you know? Well, we don't know if that goes a third of a mile. No. So it might not be a concern even with the way it's written.
Well, certainly a third of a mile, it extends certainly a few houses into those blocks, certainly.
Well, I remain an advocate of TOD and firmly believe that it does require less parking. And so I don't know, even though we'd be within a third of the mile on the east side of the tracks, presumably along Old County Road, why we would want to enforce a higher level of parking for that area simply because it's adjacent to a single-family residential neighborhood. I think the key is the quality of the development, how it's laid out, how it meshes with the neighborhood. And the parking, to me, is a give that we ought to seriously consider in each and every case because it is located close to transit, and it has proved, at least in other communities, that people drive less and have fewer cars. And so I really wouldn't want to see an exception made for the Loreola neighborhood, rather letting the merits of the case stand on their own.
I will say this, Tom, I am a little concerned with the way the train is set up now on the schedules that, we don't get, there's not as many stops in San Carlos because of the way it's set up. And so it begs the question, we're encouraging TOD and saying have less parking, and at the same time the action of the train board has been to reduce the stops here, which would then, reasonably somebody might have a car just to get from here to Hillsdale so they could make it to the express train that they want.
I agree with the speaker who said there's really no intention of increasing the daily or the stop-by-stop service, but those things do change. And I would like to believe that if there's sufficient demand, that entire project of emphasizing Baby Bullet will, of course, continue along, but with more and more realization that there are other customers out there that would like to ride and pay the fare and allow additional trains to be added, particularly as the technology improves, the switching equipment improves, and they get more trains on the track and deal better with the points where they have to meet and pass and so forth. So yeah, at this point in time, I can understand that logic. I just would hope that as time goes on, it turns more in our favor as a station, and more people can board and go where they want to go.
Okay. Brad, are you fine with?
I'm just trying to review, some of the language. I mean, I do think that clearly because this is a possible exception opportunity, not a granted exception opportunity. So I think if council isn't comfortable with actually putting, more restrictive language in here, I'm primarily concerned with the spirit of this, and I am concerned with the parking impact on the east side there. So I can understand maybe not trying to put in the code at this point in time, but I would just be reluctant as a city in that particular area for us to, if there were something that went in right near that residential area, that we would consider that exception. So if this is just a possible exception, I guess I'm comfortable moving on because we will have another shot at that.
Okay.
On the I'm sorry, Bob, you want to speak on this? On the 1954 question, the thing that bothers me is that that's when the rule came in, and people who violated the rule, do we automatically grandfather them into approval when they are obviously doing the wrong thing? And I suppose that's why staff has recommended that 1954 remains the key date. Frankly, I would agree with you. I just have a little problem getting over that hump of why should we allow something that happened in 1979 or 1986 or whenever anyone wanted to do it when the rules are obviously in place and they didn't follow them. So help me through that, and I can probably join you.
Okay. Well, the other comment or discussion that Mr. Eaton and I had when we were meeting with Jack and Mr. Garvey in these meetings was that we didn't want to necessarily write something that specifically addressed the east side, because we do have garage conversions in other parts of town too, and we want to be fair and make it applicable to those folks as well. And so that's another, this 1954 is maybe true of east side, but it's not necessarily true of someone who's on Dartmouth who might have an 8x15 garage that's not really doing them much good, so they converted it, didn't get a permit. And again, the whole idea is to try and open the door enough that people will come in and say, okay, you got me. I converted my garage to a family room, and I really shouldn't have done it, but come on in, clean up the code violations, or if there are any as far as safety is concerned, but don't make me convert this thing back into a garage. And that's what Don and I were trying to that's the stance I believe we were trying to take as an ad
So
hoc.
would there be a limited time where we would allow this, or is just sort of, as of this point, if we approved it, anytime anyone wants to come in the future, they would have solved the planning?
Well, now that's an interesting question. We didn't really talk about that, but as far as having this open forever versus open for a time, yes?
Could I ask that we ask Director Cullinan to maybe comment on if we remove the 1954, is there what was some of the reason to put that in, and what might some of the upside or the downside of removing it?
The primary reason, again, was just to sort of honor a situation where a house was built and not required to have a garage, so not to intensify the degree of nonconformity or the conversion of a garage that was required at some point. By eliminating the 1954 point, you're just really becoming more liberal on the issue. In terms of timing, this is very much like the amnesty, the second dwelling unit amnesty program. We didn't have a time limit on that. We still don't. We don't get a lot of them. There's not a flood, as I think some people were suspecting, and actually suspecting there would be parking problems. So we weren't, from the staff perspective, proposing a time limit on that particular exception.
So I suppose it could just be something that we revisit at some point in the future when we see it not being used very much. Because I agree with you, Tom, that it probably shouldn't be something that's just left on the books forever, necessarily.
And through the mayor, if I may, you may also want to treat the issue of sensitivity to the residential neighborhoods around there as something that you keep an eye on as well. And that's another way to approach that. You can gauge by the number of appeals you might get, for example. There's a number of different ways to assess whether or not it's working, or you need to be more specific in your language.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, I'm not going to take a hard stance on it, on the 1954. I would like, but, I could see striking it. Item B, I could see adding some language that requires EDCC review of these off-site parking spaces, just again so that they're not white slabs of concrete that people add to their front yards. And Don and I both felt very strongly about that.
Just so I understand the concern, my impression of this was that people would just, that this meant that there has to be the existing driveway, that there is perhaps an on-site parking alternative to not being able to park in the garage. It seems like what you're indicating is that maybe someone would pave over their front lawn or something like that. Or I guess I'm just trying to understand it better.
Again, when Don and I were discussing it in ad hoc, we did consider that, yes, not that they would just pave over their whole lawn, and that would be the reason for it also going to EDCC. But if you have, a lot of these homes have just like a 10-foot wide driveway. It's the same width as the garage is, essentially. And so you can't park a car on there without being tandem to the car that would supposedly be in the garage. And so they might want to widen their driveway in order to have an extra place to park a car, so they can park two cars essentially off the street. And if they're going to do that, we had a concern that people did not just take a drive and widen it out of concrete and it be an eyesore to the community.
Through the chair, don't we already have rules and regulations regarding that? I mean, or just it's...
The way I read this is it's one for one. It just says space, not spaces. So it's an alternative space. So if there's a 10-foot wide driveway, that's an alternative space. That's the way I interpret it. I'm sorry, Director Coleman.
It's envisioned as additional space, and I believe Councilmember Crisili is talking about the landscape, having the parking space be aesthetically pleasing. Is that?
Well, that, and also the fact, I mean, I took it, I think, as Councilman Lewis said, I just assumed it was a driveway. I mean, Mayor Grocot's bringing up a whole other issue that I thought would be under some control of somebody if you want to just start paving over things.
Well, two things maybe this will help. In terms of the second dwelling unit ordinance where you have an additional parking space required unless you get an exception, many times we're able to have people widen driveways slightly and create an additional parking space. It may be that the driveway's a little bit wider than the garage dimensions for some reason or another. So we've been pretty creative at the staff level in trying to implement an alternative parking space. In getting at the issue of process, whether the EDCC or the zoning administrator reviews these kinds of things, you might want to provide staff direction on whether you envision both bodies reviewing it or actually deferring that exception to the EDCC or having the zoning administrator review both. So just clarification if you're going that direction.
I guess it is my impression. I think this is maybe also what Councilmember Grisoli is getting at. Is it seems like this is sort of an alternative space for a space. My impression was we have other ordinance and other rules that apply to widening driveways and so forth that would come under the jurisdiction of of a different ordinance, not necessarily this ordinance. This is one alternative space as by this language, and then if they wanted to go to a wider space and there's a permit process for that, then that would be subject to review of our general city guidelines, not just this particular guideline.
Very well. Could you speak to that?
Sure. The only limitations we would have on that are really through encroachment permits with the city engineer's office. We don't yet have limitations on paving front yards. It's something we've explored in the past before. It may happen with the general plan update. We've tried it once before, probably 7 years ago. But right now, somebody could essentially pave over their entire front yard without limitations. So we have other ways of addressing that through the discretionary processes. But
And I guess my suggestion is maybe that's a discussion for another time on that ordinance, so you don't have a lot of paving over front yards.
Well, I'd like to call the question, and I'll make a motion, and maybe there's a second. I don't know if that's through the chair, if I can do that.
You're
I'd like to make a motion to, and we are introducing, staff help me on the wording here, because I'm a little...
Introduction of ordinance.
Introduction, yeah.
So I'll make a motion that we introduce this ordinance.
Before you do that, you'll need to adopt the negative declaration.
Okay, make a motion to adopt the negative declaration.
And introduce
the ordinance. Now, and then are there some of the changes, like Mr. Lewis wanted to eliminate lifts outside? Do I put that now, or do I put it?
So, and before you got to that, you would base it on the findings listed in the staff report and the draft ordinance, and then with the changes.
All right,
for
so
example-
I'll introduce the motion to introduce the ordinance, approve the negative declaration, introduce the ordinance based on the findings in the staff report, and the only change that I would make is to agree with Councilmember Lewis to eliminate parking lifts on the outside, or outside parking lifts.
I'll second.
Okay. Any further discussion or questions? We've had a motion by Councilmember Grisilli, a second by Vice Mayor Davids to introduce the ordinance, and also regarding the negative declaration to accept the findings that are in the report on the negative deck.
On the question, Bob, would you liberalize the 1954 date?
I think that 54 dates should just stay in there. But that's my opinion. And there could be other comments.
Are we ready? Okay. Roll call.
Councilmember Grisilli.
Yes.
Councilmember Davis.
Yes.
Councilmember Lewis.
Yes.
Mayor Grocott.
Yes. Okay. Turning quite a few pages in our booklet, we come over to item 9A, I believe. Excuse me, no, we have another.
We have it. 8B.
Yeah.
Sanitary sewer.
8B, because I knew that Mr. McTari was not the police chief or anybody associated with the police department, so there had to be another item, and it is 8B, consideration of setting sanitary sewer rates for all user categories for fiscal years 06-07, 07-08, and 08-09.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, hopefully I have a couple of slides here that will come on. What has happened, the South Bay System Authority, who operates the treatment plant, have raised the San Carlos share of operation and maintenance and reserve for fiscal year 2006-2007 by approximately 31%. And so that's a major item that we have to consider. And at the same time, city's cost of operation and maintenance to the collection system has increased by approximately $500,000. By approximately $500,000 due to city overhead cost. One of the projects that we have in design to implement, hopefully, is to install some air relief valves to minimize flooding of the homes, therefore to minimize the liability cost of the city and cost of the insurance. So the three elements of SBSA cost has gone up from $1,935,000 to $2,534,000 for next year, and city's operation maintenance cost of collection system is $3.707 million, and we're proposing the capital improvement program of $1.8 million. This $1.8 million is to install approximately 1,500 of these air relief valves to stop flooding of the homes, and replacing a lot of the laterals, and 800,000 of it is to replace approximately 700 to 800 linear feet of main lines. And we are in the process of preparing the plans and the specification. We'd like to have the first project, which is installing the air relief valves, out as soon as City Council approves. So based on these three elements, as you can see, the total required budget is over $8 million. At the end of this fiscal year, there's $3 million in the fund balance, and based on the revenues that will be generated based on existing rates will be $4.5 million. And considering that the additional minor revenues, if we go by this, as you can see, at the end of the year, the fund balance will be minus $372,000. But if we raise the rates by 30%, the total revenue generated will be $5,850,000, and at the end of the year, the fund balance is $978,000. This is basically the reserve, and it is really very important that this operation and this program have about $2 million in reserve. But I think, we're moving towards that. At the end of the third year, as you can see, we'll be reaching approximately $1.68 million. But the reason that this is very important, that this will be going to $2 million for emergencies, because if something happens, for example, during an earthquake and major trunk line breaks, that's $2 million cost right there. So I think hopefully we can live with that and slightly increase next year, and hopefully at the third year we reach to that point. I'll give you some examples of other cities and other sanitation district rates. As you can see in that chart, City of San Carlos right now is the lowest. And actually, if you look at that chart, that is table 2 in the packet. At 5 o'clock today, we received information from San Mateo County that if you look at the third line of which is Crystal Spring County Sanitation District, existing at $468 for 06-07, that is going to go to $1,517. In the Devonshire County Sanitation District that San Carlos actually serves and provides the capacity, for 06-07 is going to $983. And for Emerald Lakes is $449, is going to $683. And in Scenic Heights from $348 is going to $701. So these are all based on increased cost of operation and maintenance, and the county putting some capital improvement program for their collection systems. So again, looking at all of this, again, even by raising the 30% and the 22%, 12%, San Carlos really is still sort of at the bottom of the rates in San Mateo County. And other cities all considering raising, but everybody's looking at other cities, and we don't have the staff report because the staff are reluctant to release what they will be proposing, because of course they want the city council to see it before other people see it. So we're not alone in this endeavor, and we really recommend this rates be increased by what the staff has recommended. I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Okay, questions for Mr. Mukhtari?
Harvey's, I've always wondered this, but when we look at the Devonshire and we're looking at that cost, and you say it's going to about double or even more than double, how much of that goes, or do we collect as the collector, and if to move it on to SBSA?
What we collect from these county sanitation districts is San Carlos rate minus 20%, because we don't maintain the collection system in those districts. We maintain the balance of the collection system, and we pay the SBSA. So the county pays us our rates, which is going to be $395 minus 20%.
So the county actually maintains the collection system in the Devonshire area?
Yes.
Then moves it into our feeder system on into the plant?
Correct.
And one other thing I question regarding the CIP. You mentioned a certain number of air valves. Are these designed to stop the backflow problem?
Yes.
Okay.
That's the one, actually, we talked about this, I think it's been about 2.5 years ago, talked about that. We have installed over approximately 500 of those, and the next project we'll be installing about 1,500. And our claims have gone down substantially, and the insurance premium is going down. So over the long run.
That's a cost recovery in effect over time, isn't it?
Yes.
Or it could be. So you would designate the critical homes that might be especially susceptible to the backflow.
Exactly.
And take care of those in the 15.
Most of them are in the flat areas of the city.
Yeah.
Yes.
I might mention to the council members in terms of SBSA, where I'm a representative, that we have economized to the point where our reserves are gone. And when you look at a 5-foot main that's running from our plant, our pump plant, on into and joining with other collectors on into the plant, when something like that breaks, it's terrible. The cost of repairing it is just phenomenal, and we can't continue to operate the SBSA without sufficient reserves. So that's basically the reason for the 30%. Now, Parvisa's proposed some increases during subsequent years that continue to be fairly high. I think our big hit is this year for 30%, and then we back down to something like 4 or 5% for subsequent years, which continues to bring our reserves up to where we need them.
Correct. What SBSA costs will go up, as you're absolutely right, about 4%, up to 5%. But as you can see, we recommend you reducing the capital to about 700 instead of 1.8, because once we install these 1,500 units, I think we'll take care of most of the city, and we're replacing about 7,000 to 8,000 linear feet of main line. We're going to be in really very good shape. About $700,000 a year, I think, will be very good capital improvement program.
Well, again, Parviz, you get to be the messenger, and I certainly don't want to kill the messenger. I mean, you didn't come up with this out of out of the blue. I was just stunned when I saw a 30% increase. Of course, I'm stunned when I see 30% increase in anything, which is basically going from $276 to $359 is $24.70, about 80 some odd dollars. If we had, and when I put the pejorative we, I guess it's easy to say I wasn't here. I could always say somebody else didn't do it. But if we just started in 2001 and 2002 and gone up 5.5% a year, which was about $15 at the beginning and $19 at the end, we would have $380 collected now, and then we would still have to increase under your plan 15% next year and 12% the next year to get to your reserve numbers. Okay, that's what we would do, and I'm just very frustrated because I'm not used to this. And I guess it's because I'm not used to government having enough reserves. We have $3 million now, but it wasn't enough. And again, I'm not criticizing you directly. Again, it's an issue that's throughout the government. We're seeing it in the fire service too, where we don't have enough reserves to pick up some of the things we need to do. So I'm editorializing, and the first time I think I've done that in this seat, but I am, and I'm just very frustrated. And I would hope that at least from this council member, that if there are any others out there, so to speak, of costs that we need to do in the city, I would certainly love to do them a little at a time. I think the public would understand an increase of $15 or 5%, something like that, as opposed to all of a sudden getting hit with a $24.70, $84, $83 item on their. I think this is on their property tax. Is that correct?
Correct.
I'm just very disappointed that that this had to happen. And like I said, I would encourage that if there are any other items in the city that we need to address, I would hope that they be brought to us sooner rather than later to see if we can identify some other things so we don't have 30% increases in cost to this. But I'm not discounting what you want to do, because I think the sooner you can fix the issues of those 1,500 laterals or whatever, I think the sooner it helps everybody in the city. I'm not discounting any of the work you're doing. I'm just commenting on the process, which is very frustrating to me. So.
I understand. I appreciate that. But to give you a little background, why in 2000 and 2001 and the following years we did not raise this issue of installing this air relief valves and the laterals was not an issue. It was not in the program to do that. And we introduced an ordinance to City Council to give the responsibility of all that to the property owners for the backflow devices, and City Council was reluctant to adopt that and directed the staff to come up with an alternative. And this was the alternative, and it was reported. And if you go through this alternative, of course, there's costs associated with it. And with this $1 million, we invested about $2 million in that program that was not part of the capital program in 2000 and 2001. And the other one that, as Councilmember Davis said, SBSA, the reserve that they just raised is they realized this plant is about 25 years old. Someday, got to replace this plant. It's not going to operate forever. So all of a sudden, they decided for every year from all these agencies, you should collect about $3 million for at least next 5 years to have something like $15 million in reserve. San Carlos share is $602,000. This was it just came. Was not forecasted before. So these are the reasons that I'm just giving you the background.
I understand. All of a sudden, though, is not a way I like to operate personally. I mean,
understand.
That's the word you used, and that's fine. We're not in control of this. I'm just saying, all of a sudden isn't like something that I'm, like to do. It's, again, editorial. First time and hopefully the last time for a long time that you'll hear it. So thank you very much.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Any further discussion or questions of staff? Okay, thank you, Mr. Vicari. Discussion? I would only say that I concur with you 100%. If there are a way to step this up, get to the same dollar amounts at the end of '09, but
there's no way to do it now. But I'm just making a point of
right.
It's just the frustration of that situation. If there's anything else out there, hopefully we can look at it so that we don't have to come up with a big 30% pop on anybody's budget, and it might be bigger. It might be a bigger item next time for some other dollars. And again, like I said, all of a sudden everybody woke up and saw they had a building, or I don't know. It's just difficult for me again because I'm not used to doing it this way. So my style.
I think in a sense it's the nature of JPAs with multiple jurisdictions. You want to keep it down. You want to economize. No one wants to go out of the room recommending a rate increase, especially to stash away millions of dollars for something that they can't see happening. But I think we got trapped in our own devices. We ended up with a $3 million cost on the outfall from treated water to the bay, through the levee. It was a huge project, and suddenly woke up. As part of, he said, this 25-year-old plant, and we better start putting some money aside and start making some replacements because it ain't going to last forever. And but it is kind of a JPA situation, and I think we've caught the South County fire, and we got the reserves going on that. We got reserves going on this, so hopefully at least these two are pretty well settled.
I share Councilmember Griselli's frustration. I think our job at this point is when we get to 2 years from now, when we start looking forward, is try to do our best job and look in the crystal ball and take from the whether it's the plant that needs to be replaced or whatever, and keep a consistent, revenue base there. So there is the unexpected, because you're right, Tom, we can't have, salt away millions and millions of dollars if it's never going to happen. But I think there's certain things that are within our purview, and then we should be able to take a look at and say, yeah, these may happen, and let's inch up on it as opposed to, because we can always inch up on it and then reallocate some funds or whatever as well.
And this is not to prolong the discussion, but we're in the process now of doing a study which will complete by the end of the year, which will actually establish a replacement value for the various components and a time at which we should consider doing that. So we've taken huge steps in the last few months to come in tune with the problem, but we do have to play catch up, and that's where we're here.
Great.
I will add that the time I sat in for you at that meeting, your first visit out there, you realize how old the structure is.
Yeah.
And I'd also add that, what we just heard about emergency preparedness and mitigation measures, and this relates because if you don't keep up that kind of infrastructure, and then you have an earthquake, and you have damage that is worse than it would have been if you had new pipes in and so forth, then you've created larger issues by not paying attention to that kind of thing. So it's unfortunate, but we have to do what's necessary here. So I would entertain a motion for this item then, for ordinance number 1358.
Mr. Mayor, excuse me, through the chair, you need to open your public hearing and then close it, and then take your vote.
Oh, I see. Okay, I'm
Thank you.
sorry. So we'll open the public hearing. And on this item, we have no speaker cards. So I would consider a motion to close the public hearing.
So move.
And we've had a second. All in favor? Aye. None opposed. Mr. Vice Mayor, go ahead.
Move introduction of the ordinance, ordinance number 1358, ordinance of the City Council of the City of San Carlos, amending section 13.08.250 of the Municipal Code, sewer service charges and fees.
Second.
Okay, that was moved by the Vice Mayor, a second by Mr. Lewis. Roll call.
Councilmember Davids?
Yes.
Councilmember Lewis?
Yes.
Councilmember Grisilli?
Yes.
Mayor Grocott?
Yes. That does bring us to item 9A, which is a approval of contract for police dispatch service with the City of Menlo Park. Chief Rothaus.
Good evening, Mayor Grocott, members of the City Council, Greg Rothfuss, Police Chief. If you remember earlier this year, I think it was in January, we came before the City Council and requested permission to enter into contract discussions with the City of Menlo Park to outsource our dispatch services to them for significant cost savings to the City of San Carlos. And I'm here to report to you the results of that. If you remember, there was really 4 significant issues that I talked about that night. First of all was that if we were going to enter into contract negotiations for dispatch services, again, there's 4 criteria. We had to have a significant cost savings. And I can tell you that the contract we're bringing forward right now shows a significant cost savings of about $250,000 a year. Also, in addition to that, we believe and have a plan to transition our dispatch services to Menlo Park without using general fund monies. We've identified grant sources, so all the transition costs can be paid for by grant funding. The second issue, if we were going to make this transition happen, was one that was brought up by council members that night and clearly was a concern of yours, and that was to make sure that the employees were made whole in this and that we took a good consideration of their issues. And I can tell you that we spent a great deal of time working with the employees group. They had a lot of input on what we did. They were represented by Linda Gregory of ASME, and we worked at long hours with them to try and bring up the best deal we could for them. I can tell you confidently that I think we've done the best that we can, and we've done a good job, I believe, in making them whole. There are no layoffs to our city employees. There are no pay cuts to those dispatchers. Those dispatchers will continue to keep the save leave accrual rates that they had here with the City of San Carlos. They'll be coming over with up to 200 hours of leave on the books. That includes a combination of sick leave and vacation leave as well. And also they'll be keeping their anniversary dates, their employment dates for future pay increases while they're at the City of Menlo Park. So we've been able to make that deal with Menlo Park and I think gone a long way to making them whole. There was one special consideration and one special issue that we brought forth and put forth in the staff report. One of our dispatchers is a 17-year employee with the City of San Carlos, and had he stayed here as a dispatcher, he could retire with retiree medical. That's a significant benefit for this employee, and it's a significant loss. And so we felt the need to give that special consideration. Obviously, retiree medical is something that's worth a lot. It's worth a lot to this employee. And we worked out a deal that I felt is considerate of really what significant benefit that is, and yet still financially responsible. And that deal is outlined in the staff report, which is $25,000 that employee can use to offset their loss of medical retirement, providing that they retire from the City of Menlo Park with uninterrupted service. If they do not do that, then that $25,000 stays with the City of San Carlos. So that's the special employee consideration that we're asking you to consider tonight. The third issue with respect to doing this was the concept of customer service and the ability to be able to have still quality customer service. 2 components of that. Number 1 is no impact to public safety. And I can tell you that I believe that this contract will not negatively impact public safety in any way. And the second is to make sure that the citizens of San Carlos, who are used to excellent customer service from our excellent dispatchers, continue to get that with the City of Menlo Park. And I can confidently tell you that they will. I've worked for Menlo Park for 8 years. I was the commander in charge of the communications center. I know the values of that organization, and I know what they expect of their dispatchers as it relates to talking to members of the community and working in dispatch. So I'm confident that they will get high customer service. And then the last issue was the concept of technology improvements. I talked about our computer systems in January when I talked to you at first, and let you know that our system is really reaching the end of its useful life. And if we stayed on our own, we'd have to consider buying a new one soon. And that would be considerably costly to try and do it on our own. If we go to Menlo Park, we will basically piggyback onto their system. There'll still be a cost, but it'll be much, much less, and it'll be covered by grant funds that we've identified. So those are the 4 conditions that we sought to kind of meet when we walked into this deal. And I can tell you that in working with Menlo Park, as long as I have, and working with our dispatchers, that I believe that we are there, and that I would recommend that the city, that the mayor go ahead and enter into the contract with Menlo Park. Also, as a subset of this, you'll see, is the approval to shift some of our grant funds from where they were currently allocated, where they had been allocated, onto this project, again, to help pay for this project out of grant money and not the general funds. So that's it. I'll be glad to entertain any questions you have.
Okay, thank you, Chief. Questions?
Chief, regarding the payment for dispatch services, the 5-year increase year by year, is that a certain percentage each year?
Yes, it's 5%.
5% each year. So just to summarize, our current cost is $818,000, almost $819,000. When we switch over, we'll pay $574,000 to start, huh?
In year 1, yes?
In year 1, yeah, going up as we proceed forward. Okay.
Correct.
Thank you.
Chief, are the employees, have you discussed it with the employees, or they feel good about the deal and good about the transition?
We've really been at the table with the employees all along. We've had regular meetings with the employees, and we've discussed virtually every issue that will impact them along the way. I feel good that we have been able to really meet as much as 90% of what they were hoping for us to meet. I don't really feel it's a good idea for me to speak for the employee group or whatever, but I think it's really not in the union's desire to enter in these kinds of agreements traditionally. I think Linda Gregory could speak to that if you wished her to. But I also believe that we've done a good job with that. I remember it was clear when I came out of here to that meeting that this council was very concerned about the employee issues. And I had the strong support of the city manager to work with the union in that regard. And I can tell you I feel very good about what we've done in terms of the employees. There was that lagging issue of the medical retirement, but I think if we can approve this deal, I think that will go a long way to making that employee whole.
And in the transition time, there's some language in here where you describe that initially the San Carlos dispatchers will be designated to handle the San Carlos area calls before the whole agency gets more familiar with the procedure in San Carlos. Could you speak to that to clarify that a bit?
Sure. The San Carlos dispatchers, the officers and the citizens, and nobody will really feel a difference. Our San Carlos dispatchers will be on a San Carlos primary, and nobody who calls will ever know where they're seated. It'll be the same dispatchers. And what will happen is eventually they'll cross-train. Menlo Park dispatchers will come over and cross-train with San Carlos. And once the supervisor in there is clear, feels good that this person is cleared for the San Carlos primary, then they will work the San Carlos primary or be cleared to do that. But they have to understand the city first and go through a set of hoops that supervisor will put in front of them to make sure that they're comfortable in San Carlos. And then vice versa, and that's one of the benefits of the deal. It allows flexibility with relationship to personnel. And so our dispatchers will train on the Menlo primary as well. And once they're cleared to work Menlo Park, they will work on the Menlo Park primary. But yes, initially, it'll be our dispatchers on our primary, just like they are here, until another dispatcher is actually cleared to work San Carlos.
Great, thank you.
No questions for the chief. I would, after the mayor has his questions, I would like to hear from Linda Gregory if we could.
Okay. The one question I have is just is sort of strategic, and that is, I see the expediency of doing this now, and but long term, moving forward, where are we going? And number one, if we had to retract from this, and number two, just dream a little bit. Is this sort of the direction we're going with all departments up and down the peninsula, that we might end up with some kind of unified dispatch center as opposed to every agency having its own, or what's happening as you see it in the industry?
I think that's what I see and others see, Mayor, and that is the concept of more regionalized communications. I've seen it not only in this county lately as of you, I'm sure, if you're reading the papers and seeing what's happening, but also throughout California. It's really kind of, as you know, hard to predict what ultimately will happen, but it's my view that regionalizing business units like dispatch, like the gang task force, like the narcotics task force, and this approach to regionalization of specialty functions is a trend that we'll probably continue to see. And the first question is, how can we, if something happens, how will we, what was our plan B be, and what will the backup plan be? We still have our communications center currently there. We still have the components of that. If we were to have to leave this contract, we have, I think it's a minimum of 4 months advance notice before that, so we'd have plenty of time to be able to plan for that. So those are the two sides to that. And I do believe that regionalized communications in public safety is a trend that will continue.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Griselli wanted to hear from Linda Gregory.
I don't have a speech written.
You'll keep it to 2 minutes, then?
I will. When the dispatchers that you have came to work for you, they came to work for you for a reason, and they stayed here for a reason. This is a pretty terrific place to work, and ins and outs with administration and all that notwithstanding, it's still a pretty terrific place to work, even in the middle of a budget crisis. I think there's a lot of sensitivity and decency in this city, and a lot of genuine concern that no matter what the changes are in the city council, it keeps getting reflected. So that having been said, and also having been said that there are some losses here that can't be made up, that could never be made up. Every city has a different compensation package. Every city has different retirement mechanisms. You have Social Security. Menlo doesn't have Social Security. There's some complexity about that. That having been said, an awfully good faith effort was made to try to do everything that was could to make this to make people whole. And it was there's been considerable struggle by I'll certainly give the police department administration all the credit in the world. They've done a really good job, and they've gone back and back and back. And I think this is the best that can be done. And it's going into something that's unknown is always. It's always a really scary deal. Are you right about the possible regionalization of dispatch? Yeah, I think that there is a bit of a trend in that regard. And every single place where it's suggested usually fights it. I think the only time that there wasn't much fighting was when the fire all went to the county, and that was largely because fire had tended to be a kind of a stepchild of most dispatch operations, and also because the other thing about dispatch is, you're at the other end of the phone. You're not physically responding to somebody's door. And that's worked out well, and I'm pretty sure that there's some situations that won't work out well. But has this been entered into in good faith? Yes, it has. Has a lot of effort been made and a lot of concern? And I would say on the city administration's part, really no insensitivity at all toward the feelings of the employee. There's been considerable thought and considerable understanding about, for instance, what it might be to be a 17-year employee who thought they were going to spend the rest of their days here and retire. I mean, I think that there's genuine appreciation for that. So, I can't imagine any proposal for contracting services that I would be, first of all, I couldn't do it anyway physically, but I can't imagine one that would have me clicking my heels. But, I really feel like this is this has been a good faith effort, and I think the only thing to do now is just look forward and make the best investment we can.
Thank you, Linda.
Okay. I think we could entertain a motion for this item.
I'll make a motion to
approve the attached.
Approve the contract for joint communications dispatch with the city of Menlo Park.
Okay, Okay, we had a motion by Councilmember Grisilli to approve the contract that we have here, and we had a second by Mr. Lewis. Roll call.
Councilmember Grisilli?
Yes.
Councilmember Lewis?
Yes.
Councilmember David?
Yes.
Mayor Grocott?
Yes. Item 9B also is related. Actually, it's item, what is this, 9A? And I can't read the other part there, Christine. 1?
9A1.
Okay. And I don't believe, but I think the staff report that you gave covers this item as well, Chief, is that correct? Okay. And this is, the title of the item is authorizing reallocation of 0304 supplemental law enforcement service grant funds in the amount of $44,845 to the Police Communications Computer-Aided Dispatch Record Management System project.
Through the chair, I'd make a motion to authorize the relocation of those funds.
Second.
And we have so we have a motion by Councilmember Grisilli for the reallocation of those funds, and a second by Vice Mayor Davids. Any discussion on the item? Roll call.
Councilmember Grisilli?
Yes.
Councilmember Davids?
Yes.
Councilmember Lewis?
Yes.
Mayor Grocott?
Yes. Okay, and that brings us to item 9B, which is our Council RDA approval of resolutions adopting the fiscal year 06-07 annual operating and capital budget for the City of San Carlos. And I believe we have the city manager.
If we could have a couple of minutes just to set up the PowerPoint.
That would be beautiful. We'll take a short break so you can set up.
The item before you is the proposed budget for the fiscal year 2006-2007.
Oh, excuse me, before you carry on, members of the public, if you care to follow along or have a PowerPoint copy, they're in the back on the table. Thank you. Sorry.
As you know from previous meetings and from our mid-year budget meetings, the city of San Carlos has faced a significant budget deficit moving into this coming fiscal year, projected to be between $2 and $2.5 million. And the goal and objective in putting together a budget for the next fiscal year was to present to you a budget document that was truly balanced, and balanced from the standpoint of not having to use existing reserves to technically balance the budget, but rather to utilize the existing revenue streams that are coming into the city and using those revenue streams to pay for the expenses that the city incurs. I wanted to talk a little bit about the process. It literally is a 4 to 5 month process, perhaps even longer. We kicked it off this year with the retreat in February that created a strategic plan for the city of San Carlos. We followed that up with various meetings within the city staff organization in terms of meeting with the staff relative to the goals and objectives in addressing the strategic implementation plan. But above and beyond that, if we're looking at a $2.5 million deficit, that's roughly 10% of our operating budget. And so we knew that if we were truly going to balance that budget, that we needed to make some serious adjustments and take a serious look at from a holistic standpoint with respect to the budget that was before us. And so we used a modified zero-based budgeting process that asked each of the departments to look at their respective city departments from the standpoint of making reductions up to 15%, thinking that, well, if we needed to make 15% in some areas, maybe we could only make reductions of 5 or so on another. But at the end of the day, that we needed to have 10% worth of adjustments in order to create a truly balanced budget. I need to commend, want to commend all of the staff for participating in that process. I think it was something that was adopted enthusiastically as a process like this can be adopted by city staff. It was a new city manager, some new council members, it's a new process. We threw a reorganization or two at folks just for good measure to complicate things a little bit. And I think everyone participated in the process, like I say, enthusiastically and with the positive objective of trying to maintain the best quality level of services that we could for the city of San Carlos. Special mention probably should be made to Rebecca Mendenhall and to Jeff Maltby, who are the Administrative Services Director and the Finance Officer, for all of the time and effort that they put into creating the document that actually has been brought forward to you this evening that is intended and I believe actually does implement the desires and direction from the City Council that we received at a workshop in May of this year. We took the recommended program reductions, the recommended program additions, and some accounting adjustments to the City Council in a workshop setting and showed the City Council in that workshop setting what kinds of programs we were looking at making reductions into, what kinds of things we thought we needed to do in order to enhance the operational foundation for the city moving forward, including establishing some sinking funds for IT and for equipment replacement so that we would have reserves to try and ensure that we're on sound financial footing moving forward into the future. And I think we were able to do all of that, but recognizing that in order to accomplish that, we needed to make serious and real reductions in some program areas. And so what you're seeing within the document tonight is a reduction in some areas, and what we want to do is just briefly walk through some of the impacts to the various departments at this time. That's just highlighting some of the things that we've talked about in terms of previous meetings and our efforts to find a balanced budget. One of the first and foremost objectives that the city wanted to address was to try and ensure that we had the resources available for previously South County Fire, moving forward the Belmont San Carlos Fire Department, to ensure that we had the resources necessary to keep that department intact as we considered a revenue measure for this coming year. And so in order to do that, we needed to find $345,000 in order to really finance the department at its base level. But at the base level to be able to fill the vacant positions that we currently have within the fire department. So that $345,000 increase from the general fund or reallocation will provide for the necessary base budget operations for South County Fire, including an increase in funding as mandated by the county for the hazmat program. Within the City Council budget area, numerous reductions in travel, meetings, and conferences. We did, however, at the Council's direction, tweak the budget document that's before you to include funding for the Week of the Family and various youth jobs. Within the City Manager's office, we've eliminated the city or the Deputy City Manager position. We've reorganized and included within the department the economic development function, and we've actually increased legal services to reflect the actual costs. These are just a reflection, again, of the experience that we've had for the costs in that area, not a real increase, but just a reflection of what the accurate accounting should have been. Within administrative services, this is the new department that we spoke of. It's a reorganization to achieve some administrative efficiencies. It includes the finance department, the human resources department, the IT function, as well as the receptionist function. By doing that, we have eliminated the finance director position. We've eliminated the human resources director position. We've backfilled those positions with lower level positions that are mid-level management, a senior accountant, and an HR manager. We've made some reductions in part-time funding levels and some consultant services. We have, however, as I've mentioned, we've established the sinking fund for IT and equipment replacement, albeit we've reduced that from what was originally proposed. Then the building department, we reorganized and created a community development department and included the building department as a division within that community development department. The budget that you have includes one vehicle replacement there. Within Parks and Recreation, and I'm going to throw, it's not intentional, but one minor curve at you tonight. Within the departmental budget that we have, there are some reductions in part-time hours. There are some reductions in the community center hours. One of the other program reductions that was included within your budget proposal and accepted during the work study session was a use of the youth center during non-youth times for adult programs. And we showed that as being a potential $10,000 revenue, but there was healthy discussion about that program at the study session with the City Council. And because of that discussion, the Parks and Recreation Director came to our office and suggested that he would like to propose an increase in the special needs program fees to establish a fee for non-residents in that program to raise the money that would allow us to avoid having to use the youth center for non-youth times for adult programs. And so that is one option. That's the one little surprise or the one little tweak that we'd like to have you consider tonight that is not included within the staff report as it's currently presented to you. It would be an alternative to avoid having to use the Youth Center for Adult Programs. And we mentioned to you during the study session that in order to accomplish that, we would have to come back to you and revisit various policies and programs in any event. And if you would choose to adopt the revenue option that the Parks and Recreation Director has suggested, we would not pursue the administrative tasks of bringing forward that program change. So if you would make note of that and remind us to visit that before the evening is over, we would appreciate it. There were changes made to the program based upon our discussion at the study session to try and maintain the youth center hours and program levels, to continue the subsidy of the Healthy Cities program, to continue funding for the public art program and for the tree lighting event, as well as to provide funding for meeting and landscape maintenance or island landscape maintenance. So those monies are included within the budget document. You'll still see some references to those being potential reductions and various program reductions that are mentioned in cutbacks. because we haven't cleaned up the entire document, some of the program changes or the attachments that are included to the staff report. But we wanted to provide you assurance that we have included funding within this document for the tree lighting event as well as for the median and island landscape maintenance efforts. I should make mention, however, that there is the elimination of one maintenance worker position. It is a vacant position, and there will be some effects from the reduction of that one full-time position. In the planning department, that is another department that is being reorganized and combined within the community development department. We have reduced the consultant contract there from approximately $750,000 to a range of $480,000 to $600,000. The $480,000 represents the amount necessary to pay for the retainer. There will be additional funds approved for planning services, especially in the early months as we advertise for, but until we have the community development director on board. I believe it will be necessary to subsidize some or supplement some of that retainer amount with approval for some additional hourly times to maintain our current and existing level of service, but well within the $600,000 authorization provided by the contract. We also funded a general plan update that's being funded by new fees that have been established within the city. Within the police department, we have eliminated one vacant police services technician position as well as one police sergeant position that has been dedicated to traffic. And as you've just considered, there is the provision for the outsource of dispatch operations. In the Public Works Department, we've eliminated the administrative assistant position. We have, however, funded the assistant city engineer and assistant public works director position. The sewer fee increase you considered earlier this evening, funding for the Safe Routes to Schools program, and energy cost reductions that the public works director has recommended be accepted within the budget. The summary positions that have been eliminated within this within this budget include the deputy city manager, the finance director, the human resources director, the traffic sergeant, the parks maintenance worker, a parks services technician, a public works administrative assistant, and the outsourcing of dispatch operations. I think it goes without saying that when you make reductions of that nature and eliminate positions like that in a city of this size, that there's an impact to the organization, and we don't want to minimize that. We won't have necessarily the administrative support that the finance director or the human resources director or the deputy city manager might have provided to the organization at large. We do believe, though, that there will be some efficiencies recognized and realized through the consolidation of some of these departments into an administrative services department. I don't know, and I'm not going to represent to you that those savings are going to equal without an impact to services. I don't know that you can do more with less in an organization that has experienced the mid-year reductions that this organization has faced for the past 5 years or so, as we've struggled to try and reduce the amount of reserves that have had to be tapped in order to balance our budgets and try to maintain a sizable or at least a working reserve that we can build from. With that, that's an overview of what the approach was that we attempted to use with some of the programmatic impacts that this budget will have upon the city. What I would like to do is turn it over now to Jeff Maltby and let him walk through some of the numbers that are included within the packet for your and the public's edification. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council. I'm very pleased to be here tonight to help present the 2006-2007 annual operating budget to you. Before I begin, I just want to give a special thank you to my staff, Mary Nakamura, Addie Carta, Dorothy Dale, Beth Liu, Linda Navarro, Mike Wright, Marilyn Madem, Diane Snow, and a special thank you again to Rebecca Mendenhall, the finance officer. You may not be aware, you may be, I'm new to this position. I came in to it sort of in the middle of the budget process and really appreciate all the support that I've got from my staff, as well as all the departments and department directors in the city who are really willing to lend a hand to a new process with a lot of new people involved. It's been exciting and fun, and I'm very proud of the budget that we're presenting to you this evening. Just a little bit of an overview. You've seen this before for the most part at the study session, so I don't want to spend a lot of time on it this evening, but this particular chart represents the overall budget, starting with a $2.5 million structural deficit. What the budget accomplishes is it provides funding for an additional $790,000 of program funding. Those are changes, additions to the budget that were proposed by the departments that were recommended by the city manager, were considered by the council at the May 30th study session, and have gone on through into the proposed budget. There were a number of changes proposed to revenue and transfer and reclassification options. We've been through that. They include a whole host of things, some minor, some major, including the overhead charges that we've talked about, some of the reallocations, allocating some of the attorney's time, some of even the city council's time to other non-general fund sources to appropriately match the type of time and effort we all spend on those other funds. And then there are the program reduction options. Those are the cuts. 1.17 million, a little bit less than we had originally started with at the May 30th study session, but reflecting the desire and direction of the City Council. And then we come to the Fund 25 transfer option. We've done this for the last 3 years in the budget, and at the end of each year, we've been in a position where, through a combination of expenditures being lower than anticipated and revenues being higher than anticipated, we've canceled that particular transfer, but it's been in the budget the last several years. And it goes into Fund 25, the capital, the general fund capital budget. One of the changes in the philosophy of budgeting that we've received from the city manager's direction here is to fund everything fully. And rather than rely on that type of savings we generate annually through vacant positions, the time it takes to do recruitments, all the normal things that come up through the course of a year that generate those expenditure savings, rather than count on those to balance the budget the next year, we're going to count on that savings to be used in terms of one-time expense for the capital budget. So in next year's budget, you would see savings coming forward potentially as part of this or other one-time considerations being proposed by the city manager. These are the fund balance highlights. This gives you some idea of how the funds are performing. The general fund, as you can see in 05-06, top left-hand corner, the original budget that had been adopted had the general fund unallocated fund balance dropping down to about $500,000. It's actually estimated to be about $2.6 million right now. Those are the one-time savings that accumulate over the course of a year, the increase in revenue over projected. Those are the kinds of things that could be coming forward next year as part of one-time spending. Our base budget would have taken that down to $93,000. That's your $2.5 million structural deficit, eating up your unallocated fund balance if you weren't to pass a balanced budget, structurally balanced budget tonight. The proposed budget has it at $1.9 million, though there's an element of that $1.9 million that's not showing up there, and that's the $500,000 we talked about at the study session to establish a Gadsby 45 reserve as we do that actuarial study this year. We thought we'd go ahead and set some money up. It'll be sort of an unrestricted earmark fund to see where we're at and potentially get a head start. Some of the other funds, as you can see, had been budgeted to go into the negative, and we've proposed in this budget to correct all that. The biggest one of note, obviously, is the Storm Drain Maintenance Fund 15. That's NPDES. That fund had developed quite an ongoing structural problem. We've solved the year-to-year problem in the budget that's presented to you so that the year-to-year is balanced, and we propose to loan about $500,000 from the general fund to NPDES to right that fund. If down the line there's more revenue approved by the state or federal level that can help us fund that program, then possibly it could begin to pay back the general fund, but at this time we don't anticipate that. This just gives you a bit of a visual on what's happening with the fund balances. You can see them going up and down over the years. A little bit difficult to see. The revenue summary that we've used to put this budget together basically projects general fund revenue being flat. And there's a couple of reasons for that. We've got 3% budgeted for growth in sales tax. Seems to be a comfortable number that that staff believes we'll meet. We show property tax going up 4.5%. Again, conservative but comfortable. I don't think we'll be too far off that if interest rates continue to rise and the housing market continues to slow down as it has. There's kind of a big change in the other revenue and fees for service. A lot of that is related to the revenue, the $250,000 we received from RGS, LGS, as you're aware. Those two JPAs that were fostered here in San Carlos are ready to go out on their own, and they're taking their contracts for service and sort of bringing those in-house and doing other things with them next year. So we'll have a loss of revenue there. They all basically add up for a pretty flat revenue picture next year. And this is just a picture showing you what revenues have done. You could see the big decline from the 2000-2001 era. Another point of note is the 2004-2005 era, where you see property tax really shoot up, and that's related to the famous triple flip, where the state substituted a lot of our sales tax for property tax dollars as they dealt with their own financial problems. Other than that, we've seen modest growth over the last couple of years in most of our revenue categories. The expenditure summary, again, we're looking at a relatively flat picture across all the funds with reductions as noted. Salaries and benefits, as you can see from the 05-06, $13.5 million, going up $200,000 in 2006-2007. When you factor in the very high rates of escalation for both the retirement, PERS retirement, and medical costs, that really seeks to offset a lot of the position reductions that we've seen today and hold your personnel, for the most part, relatively flat next year, which is really what's helping this budget remain balanced. And then the operating expenses. The theory and how we began the budget was to account for a 2% increase in all the operating expenses, and then allow the departments to begin to move things around and fine-tune. Ultimately winds up being a little bit more than 2% across the board, and there are a couple of reasons for that, including the Gatsby 45 one-time transfer that we talked about. There was money appropriated in this budget, $50,000 for a general plan update. That's general fund money. There were 2 new budget units that needed to be developed as part of the reorganizations, and that is for Community Development Administration and Administrative Services Administration, as well as all the smaller one-time, or not one-time, but the new proposed fundings that were presented to you as part of the study session and based on council direction were included there. So it goes up, it goes down. The net is about a $600,000 change there. And the next slide gives you some idea of where the city spends its money. A little over 50% on public safety, approximately 22-25% on parks and recreation, the remainder getting split up between general governmental, which includes administration, finance, HR, those types of functions, and then the community development, public works functions. And that's how the general fund pie is divided up here in San Carlos. The next slide deals with the transfer summaries, and this could be a little bit complicated. The transfers in are how we're moving money around between the funds to the general fund. So you could see the total transfers in going up quite a bit. Obviously, the largest source of that increase is the proposed $1.3 million transfer station transfer. Then there's a little increase in the sewer right-of-way. That's the charge that the general fund receives from the sewer fund for right-of-way use. Gas tax and street maintenance actually going down, which means the general fund's providing a little bit more funding in the gas tax, street maintenance, street lighting arena next year. Library tenant improvements are dropping off as those projects are completed. And there's the other overhead funding. Those are the overhead funding factor that you've heard about this year at the study session, and then again a little bit tonight, to ensure that the other funds are paying their fair share to the general fund to recoup costs in support of those funds. And then there's some miscellaneous changes, including PD grants, where we're taking the grants out of the unrestricted general fund area and creating their own separate fund to help us manage those grants more effectively next year and track the money. Then there are a number of transfers out of the general fund, and the three big ones to note are the Balanced Storm Drain Maintenance Fund. That was the loan to NPDES of $500,000. That's a one-time expense coming out of the unallocated fund balance for the general fund. There's the Equipment Replacement Reserve of $400,000. Again, that's a one-time cost to do catch-up in the area of equipment and technology maintenance and replacement. And then, of course, the GASB 45 Reserve, which is earmarked for whatever the study shows to be San Carlos's liability next year, to get a potential head start on that. Beyond that, we move into the capital budget. There's a whole number of projects. You heard a little bit from the Public Works Director earlier this evening about the $1.8 million sewer replacement program. I very much like the way Councilmember Davids put it, where he said this could be a cost recovery project. Speaking as the risk manager for a second, I certainly hope that to be the case, and we've seen some real positive evidence so far that could be. In the gas tax world, we've got $980,000 budgeted for street resurfacing programs next year, $20,000 for sidewalk reconstruction, and $10,000 for the pedestrian safety program that the council, I believe, specifically asked be placed back in at the study session. There's a whole number of projects being proposed for Fund 25. There's a remodel to Consolidated Administrative Services within City Hall to create an area large enough to house the IT, HR, and finance functions. Currently, the way the second floor is configured and City Hall is configured, it cannot accommodate a department of that size right now. And we believe that down the road there will be additional efficiencies should we put those together, including the ability to cross-train, keep public windows open all day, every day, as opposed to now where we have to close intermittently because of staffing levels, vacations, sick leave, that kind of thing. And then in addition to administrative services, we've proposed that we would include the city clerk's department in that remodel so that we could, while not combine the departments, combine the administrative manpower to ensure that we can help each other, help the public more effectively. There's $60,000 for Kiwanis building roof replacement. There's $18,000 to modify pedestrian access to the San Carlos Library. There's about $177,000 in next year's budget for drainage projects. Originally, there was a little more, and we've pushed some of that out to the second year of the 5-year capital budget to allow some necessary planning to take place next year in anticipation of some additional 08 drainage projects. There's about $402,000 of technology projects, which also includes about $100,000 for a CRM, customer service response and tracking system, in accordance with some of the customer service standards and goals this council is interested in, and quite frankly is becoming sort of the norm for an organization this size or larger to be able to track the complexity of all the requests and information that we get and ensure that the public is getting the kind of timely response that they deserve. And finally, two more. There's the Park and Lou Fund. There's $350,000 coming out of that fund for Burton Park play equipment. About $5,000 for a drainage project at Burton Park. There's a lot of planning money next year, $150,000 for the Parks and Recreation Master Plan that's had a lot of talk and discussion amongst this council this year, and then $120,000 for Highlands, Heather, and Terra Linda field studies. Finally, there's the redevelopment fund, continuation of the first-time home buyer, $275,000, though in the past we haven't used quite all that money in any given year, but we want to have the ability to fund those loans should they come forward. A drainage master plan, $250,000, again, an issue that the council's familiar with, and about $190,000 in some flood control projects. And then the Airport Way project is still under review, so we don't know whether or not that may come forward. If it does, we'll bring it forward as an amendment to the budget. So if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. If you have any questions about specific budgets, the department heads are here, specific projects. They're also here to help answer any questions. So thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Hearing no questions from council, I'd entertain a motion to, oh, I guess not. Okay, council, questions for staff on the budget document?
Mr. Weiss, I just had a question. You indicated there was a little change at the beginning, a possibility of a fee of some sort. I was looking at the staff report on page 3 of 6. At the top, it has $10,800 in for that amount if we allowed additional space for adult health and wellness. Do you see that? I'm sorry.
Attachment 4.
It's attachment 4, page 3 of 6. Sorry. It's in the staff report.
We're showing $10,000 for the adult programs in youth parks and recreation.
$10,800. The top of the page.
Yes.
Okay. It's got a line through mine, but...
Okay, sorry. And again, I apologize. I'm Mr. Numbers here. On page 6 of 6 at the bottom, it says total list of options incorporated into the fiscal year 2007 budget. It's $2,510,829.
Correct.
So if I take the $8,000 or $10,800 away from that, and I take the $2.5 million away from that, I have $29, right?
Correct.
I'm balanced, right?
Yes.
Jeff's shaking his head no.
Not quite. Currently there's a $6,000 fund balance with the way the budget's presented.
Okay, but it wasn't in our staff report. It was in your slideshow, but it wasn't in our staff report.
The $6,000 wasn't. It's in the budget.
I'm just going off this report that I'm Mr. Malpe that I'm looking at. I'm sorry. This attachment 4.
This attachment 4, correct. Not showing a $6,000 that I'm talking about.
Right. It's not in there.
Right.
Okay. Okay. I'm just trying to balance this off without doing any fees is what I was trying to get at, and I didn't realize there was another $6,000, floating around somewhere. So, thank you.
We didn't show you the comprehensive list of all the other programs and the like that we considered. We showed you the ones that we had actually proposed to include here, and then there was the one additional change that I referenced that the Parks and Recreation Director was recommending an increase in fees to allow the council the option to choose.
And I was just looking at what I had in front of me. I didn't have this other $6,000 that Mr. Malpe was speaking about. That's all. I was just trying to make it come out even, but I wasn't successful. So, thank you.
Is that all your questions at that point?
To this point, thank you.
All right.
Can we talk, just have a question about the increase in fees for the special needs program. I remember when we discussed at the study session that the non-resident VIP use of that facility so I'm familiar, roughly with what we're talking about there. The thing that I had hoped is that if we were going to pass on fees in that area, that we would pass on those fees to somehow have a discussion with other cities, and maybe they could help, because we're funding our residents, maybe the other cities could look into funding their residents that are taking advantage of that program. So I realize that we might be able to, adjust for the non-resident use of that by raising fees. I guess what I'm asking, is there any way to help pursue the other cities to help fund that as opposed to the individual private users?
We had thought of that also, and the short answer is no, because we're not providing a service for the city government. We're providing a service for individual citizens. And so, for lack of a better term, we have no leverage. We can ask for the money, and which we have in the past, they politely decline. I can say that the reason we did not bring this forward originally, we had already thought we would do this anyway administratively. And the reason we didn't bring it forward was the proposal before you at the study session was to reduce the size of the program, so we would not realize this revenue. We're already under market rate for our fees, and 80% of the participants are non-residents. So we thought we'd implement this non-resident fee. 60% of those participants are eligible for assistance from the Golden Gate Regional Center. Plus, we are supported by a nonprofit in this entire program, in the San Carlos program, called Advocates for Accessible Recreation, or AFAR, and they have a scholarship program. So while we do anticipate that we may get some questions from participants about why do you have to raise this, we don't anticipate any great hardship. And as you may know, people with children with disabilities already face a great many hardships, and so we try and minimize that as much as we can. But it does cost to provide service.
And what are the fees, Director Weiss? Could you just, well, with the number?
It's a slight, I don't have the specifics. I apologize. I know it depends on how many days a week you come. Some people come 1 day a week, 1 every 2 weeks, some 4 days a week, and so the rates are all over the board. But there is, again, support from the Golden Gate Regional Center and then from the nonprofit.
Great. Well, I knew you'd be thoughtful about that process. I was just curious. Thanks. One other question. In previous years, there was sort of this wheel of where the revenue goes, where the dollar goes in San Carlos. And I was secretly hoping to be included in this. But I was actually want to know if the council might be interested. I get a lot of questions about where's our sales tax money goes, where's the property taxes are raised, and where's that money going. I would love to, I know that we've got a lot of this sort of at hand, but it might be nice for not only my edification, but perhaps the public's edification to, I'd love to see where does the sales tax dollar go, both expressed as a percentage and maybe just expressed as a yearly average, and where does all the money filter out to, and what really do we end up with in the different, in sales tax and property tax categories. Average property tax, as an example, how much money filters down to the city, both as a percentage and as a dollar amount. It seems like it's a basic way where we all kind of navigate where our money goes and what we really have to deal with, and what are entitlements and what are optional dollars and what are restricted funds and so forth. So I just ask to see if council might be interested in I don't know how much time would be there. I think in a brief discussion with Mr. Weiss, he indicated that the information's sort of there. It's just a matter of how we prepare it. So if there weren't that much time, I think it'd be a great education process, not only for us, but to take a look at it, but for the public as well. So throw that out for consideration.
We do have that information readily available. I mean, it's 10 or 11 cents on the property tax dollar, yet 1% of the sales tax. I mean, we do get a small share of the tax dollar that people in San Carlos pay, and we can certainly package that and try to make sure that everyone understands that the vast majority of that money is going elsewhere.
Yeah, I guess the light on that one for me is also expressed as the dollar amount, the average dollar amount, just to sort of really see what are the types of numbers we're dealing with. I think it might be interesting.
Yeah, the report does mention the sales tax and the property tax in terms of our share, but I think Brad's right. I think if there's some sort of a kind of a cheat card type thing that we could memorize 4 or 5 facts, it would help us as we interpret to the public. So it would be helpful. I have a question on the question of the youth center. Reading through the staff report, there's some strong logic, I thought, to allowing adults to use the youth center and to raise the $10,800. So is there a reason why we don't want to do it at this point, Barry?
We just don't feel that there's enough public support out there for this one. And rather than go
Public would prefer to keep it as a youth center and keep the
They would.
adults away?
Yes. So while the statements that we provided, we still believe in, and we think there is a need even more beyond the revenue, but we can continue our existing programs, and not seeing the public support out there, we thought it would not be wise to move forward.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question related to that. The youth center building then, during the day, especially during the school year, tell us about that. What's happening over there?
A lot of programs during the day for kids. There's a lot of Mommy and Me for the toddlers, that kind of thing, mostly for that kind of program. The school kids, of course, are in school, so it's all the preschool kids.
So if it's being mentioned as an option, though, to use it, what's available?
For the adults, you mean?
Yeah, yes. If the adults were to use the youth center.
Just the gymnasium.
Just the gymnasium.
Yeah, possibly the dance studio. We were really looking for like aerobics classes during the day for adults.
And just ballpark, what percentage of the building is those spaces combined? What percentage of the building would that be?
Okay, sure.
Yeah,
I'd say the gym, Councilmember Grzilli might be able to help me here too. I would say the gym's about 30% and the dance studio is 10%.
It's at least half of the building, if not even more than the building. Yeah, it's
Okay.
huge. Yeah.
Because well, this is a discussion item, but we'll discuss it. Thank you.
Okay.
The only thing I'd like to point out along that line is revenue generation for adult programs is one thing. I just want to say that the youth center is very accommodating to some of the different programs in town where we need to have meetings. It's like a meeting primarily of adults that maybe helps run a youth organization or something like that. So there are certainly ways that the youth center reaches out and allows the community to use that facility. It's just not necessarily in this particular revenue generation between, off youth hours.
Right, we were looking for
that. We do get.
Yeah, we were looking for active classes, the adult basketball on a Sunday, that kind of thing.
Gotcha.
We certainly do like AYSO soccer registration, where mainly adults come in to register, but it's a kids program.
Okay. More questions? I would like to get to some questions. So I'm going to leave it to the council, though, if they have more. Okay. Going off of the presentation tonight, I didn't necessarily pick up on this when I was going through the document, but I had a question about the positions that are being eliminated. And when I look at it, I'm just trying to understand this. So we're going to eliminate administrative assistant to the Public Works Department. And then it's not on here, but I know Christine's office is down in personnel because of a retirement. And so if I'm understanding this correctly, though, then when we get to capital improvements, what's being proposed, I think, is that the city engineer, Public Works Department would get staffing because you're architecturally you're consolidating some offices. Is that correct? So that you'd get support services. We don't need to fulfill that position or fill that position of for instance, the Public Works Director, because they're going to be combined into one space and then use each other's administrative services? Is that what's going on?
Not necessarily specific to the Public Works Department, no. I do think that there might be some efficiencies that would allow for us to share staff and administrative support staff once we're fully organized in the administrative services world. Currently, the Public Works Director is utilizing staff that provide support to the Community Development Department because that's the location of his office at the moment. We think that is working at the moment. We think that we'd like to continue trying that arrangement for, moving into the new fiscal year.
So then on under capital improvement, when it does talk about Administrative Services Department, and City Clerk's Department into one physical location, then although I don't see that position of Deputy City Clerk on the list as being proposed for elimination, but that's where you're planning to get some consolidation there?
We've not eliminated that position, as a matter of fact, and it's not a deputy city clerk. I forget what senior.
That position is called Senior Administrative Clerk.
Okay.
It's not slated to be eliminated. It's just vacant right now due to a retirement, but we are recruiting right now. For
You
that.
are?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So where will the, what is, now I'm thoroughly confused, so with Administrative Services Department, you're suggesting a remodel to put all this in one location. Where is the efficiency or consolidation or whatever it is I might be looking for?
I mean, I think, first of all, it's going to take us some time in order to do the remodel, and so we would propose that we keep the operational staff that we have currently within this budget as support personnel during that time frame. But certainly, if we're able to put in close proximity the city clerk, the finance, HR, and IT functions, and have one window, and then during the next year, cross-train some of the personnel so that we can keep that area open. The thought is that long term that there might be some opportunity to share the administrative support personnel.
Okay. And the last question I had then is, I think Councilmember Versilley was touching on it, but if we were to do the fee increase that's been talked about, it would need to cover the $10,800, but we don't necessarily know how much that would be per person, or as you said, it depends on how much they use the program and so forth, so it would vary. Okay. Okay. Any other questions?
On that point, if I'm recalling the numbers, we're $6,000 to the good now, and if we want to give up the 10,008, we're going to be 5,000 short.
That's generally correct, yes.
And could we simply tap Fund 25 for an additional $5,000 at the balancing time?
I'd prefer not to do that because I'd like to represent this as a structurally balanced budget using the revenues that we've got coming in rather than.
Would you have a better idea?
Well, without raising the fees.
Without raising the fee, assuming we leave the special needs the way it is.
Right off the top of my head, I mean, we can come up with $5,000.
I think
Where
so.
it would come from, I can't. I'd want to take a minute or two to think.
Yeah, I'm just a little concerned about the special needs. It's a fairly expensive program, probably. It's my guess. It's and while there's some subsidies involved, there's also a great need on the part of those who are part of the program. I would just feel better if we didn't have to go to that group to balance our budget.
That's what I'm thinking.
Through the chair, again, as Councilmember Lewis said, I'm sure it was not something that was done in a cavalier manner to ever come up with this. I know the people that are involved here, so I know it didn't happen that way. But it's just very difficult for me. I know there are resources for folks. I work with a group in San Francisco for special needs folks, and there's the Golden Gate group and other groups. But and again, it's difficult for me to talk about micromanaging, and I apologize that I had to try to micromanage $5,000 out of a $23 million budget. But I appreciate, Mr. Weiss, if you could come up with some place other than raising the rates on this group of folks. I really would appreciate that. Again, I appreciate the fact getting you cold like this. The only thing I can throw back at you is that we got it cold tonight. So
that's fair. I mean, we were just talking here, and one thought is that we'd put $35,000 in for consultant or contract services to offset the loss of the one position. Perhaps we could reduce that to $30,000 and balance the budget. The other alternative is just to leave the proposal as it originally was and to bring forward the fuller utilization of the youth center when it's not being used for youth services.
I'm unfortunately, well, I'm just a bad guy tonight. I just think that's a bad idea too. But I'm like Mr. Pushback tonight. I really would appreciate that the first one that you indicated. I thought might be able to solve it, because I really think that I agree with Mr. Berryweiss that I think the community feels that the youth center at this point, at least in time, without a much more broader discussion, should really be, as best we can, utilized the way it was presented. But again, that's just my opinion. I don't know what the other council members feel.
I'd support your first alternative for contract services if you guys think that that's doable. The other thing I just want to say, because I just see things coming a little bit to a close here as far as this discussion goes. This is no ordinary effort undertaken for the city to try to get this together, and I know all the directors are out here tonight, and I appreciate the spirit with which everybody got behind our problem and tackled these issues. It seemed like everybody took a really responsible look at these things, and in fact came to council with even more cutbacks that I think that so I appreciate that effort. I mean, it doesn't happen lightly, and I think also Mr. Weiss, as you point out in the document, there's new financial software. Director Maltby and Ms. Mendenhall did a great job working together and getting thrown in the middle of this process. And also to you, Mr. Weiss, a great effort in pulling this whole thing together. I also thought our study session on the budget was one of our better council meetings. A lot of back and forth discussion, which I appreciated from fellow council members. So I just want to say there's a lot of good stuff that's come out of this process, and I appreciate the effort of everybody involved.
I'll just say on the youth center issue, and to be fair, I was actually talking to the city manager about this in one of our meetings. I just find it, I know how the whole thing was put together and the funding and so forth. I wasn't part of that, but and the promises that were made at the time. But I look at both, not just the youth center, but also the adult community center. I almost wonder why the labels. I can understand having them, predominantly be used for one thing or the other. But I would be, in both cases, open to opening up those structures to being used more, and it just being a community center. And however it would be used from that point would be up to the Parks and Rec director. And that's not to say that the youth center wouldn't be used predominantly for youth, or the adult community center predominantly for adults. But to have this artificial dividing line in saying, you have to be an adult to use this building and you have to be a youth to use this building, especially when it's, 50% of the building sits there empty. I know, Tom, we saw some of this at Menlo Park Pres, and they started opening up their buildings to other kinds of programs, and it was for the benefit of everyone. And I think the same applies here. So I could see using it for some adult classes, the gym, for the things that you're suggesting, and recouping some of these fees that way.
Through the chair, I'd make a motion to extend the meeting till 11 o'clock.
Second.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you.
I guess, Matt, maybe that's a question for a later day, but I do tend to agree. When you're as tight as facilities as we are, and then really has artificial limits, it tends to close them down. It just doesn't seem quite the thing to do. But I respect those who bring the idea forward and who went through the process of funding this and the commitments that were made. And perhaps now is not the right time. Ultimately, I think that we might move in that direction. But
I would also say that the Youth Advisory Commission, we can talk to them about how they feel about it in general. Number two, the thing I worry about is that the facility will also get used up more rapidly if we start to allow more usage of that facility, and that's also that's another concern. I also do like the philosophical commitment to that youth comes first in that building, and I think on certain terms, if they accept those terms, and maybe it's revenue generation, maybe it helps the scholarship fund, and there's some other ways to look at this, that we should entertain that. I'd love to see that come from the Youth Advisory Commission up to council if they want to consider it.
Good idea.
And I think that should be noted by staff, and we can get that process going. I think there's a consensus here on that.
I'd like to call the question through the chair.
Yes, you may.
make a motion to approve the, adopt rather the budget for fiscal year 2007 with the small adjustment of balancing it out that $5,000 or whatever number it is, $5,000 to $6,000 from the account that Mr. Malpe indicated to Mr. Weiss, which I've forgotten already.
Just a couple of things through the chair. There are two resolutions tonight, one for the City Council, one for the RDA. The adjustments that we're talking about, which would be using funds that we've allocated from the in the general fund in the Parks and Recreation Department for the contractual services, would be used to offset the $10,800 adjustment, plus the additional reserves that were already existing within the operating budget as proposed. So the $16,900 plus $5,000 thereabouts to offset the $10,800 adjustment would be part of the motion for the approval of the City Council's resolution to adopt the budget. But then we still need a second motion from the RDA, with your RDA hats on, for the RDA budget.
Okay.
So that's the motion you just made, right?
I think so.
Yeah. I'll second.
Thank you.
Okay, there was a motion to approve our 2006 fiscal year 2006-2007 budget with some minor adjustments directed to the city manager to take care of in the amounts generally around $5,000. And it was seconded by Vice Mayor Davids.
Okay. Councilmember Grisilli?
Yes.
Councilmember Davids?
Yes.
Councilmember Lewis?
Yes.
Mayor Grocott?
Yes.
Okay, same motion, and the vote will be your redevelopment agency now.
Mm-hmm.
Director Grisilli?
Yes.
Director Davids?
Yes.
Director Lewis?
Yes.
And Chair Grocott.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appropriation limit? Item 9B.
Good evening again. As part of the budget process, this time every year we come forward with the annual request adoption of the appropriation limit. So this year, the appropriation limit for fiscal year 2006-2007. This is pursuant to requirements of Proposition 4 and Proposition 11, which my understanding date back to the late 1970s. As you could see in the staff report, there are a couple of factors, an inflation factor and a population factor, that go into this calculation. Cities are allowed to choose among certain criteria in terms of how they do this. As you can see, the city's at approximately 41% of their appropriation limit, so we're nowhere near tapping out. While part of that may be attributable to the type of factors that cities can choose, and of course they choose the ones that are most favorable to the city, the vast majority of the fact we're so far under the limit, and most cities are, is attributable to over the last 30 years. So many of the revenue sources that existed back then have gone away and been shifted to the state. So in other words, the state has very much devalued revenue in dollars, and perhaps this becomes part of the conversation you'd like us to come back for, Councilmember Lewis. But that's the reason behind it. So staff is recommending adoption of the attached resolution to approve the appropriation limit. Be happy to answer any additional questions you might have.
Any questions? Any discussion? Entertain a motion.
I move adoption of the resolution 2006 dash.
Oh, you had to ask.
That's all right. Next in order.
It's 38.
And do I hear a second?
Second.
Ooh, two of them. There was a tie.
You get to choose.
We'll give it to Mr. Lewis. I don't think he's made too many seconds tonight.
Councilmember Davids?
Yes.
Councilmember Lewis?
Yes.
Councilmember Grisilli?
Yes.
Mayor Grocott?
Yes. And that brings us now to item 9C, review existing public notification standards.
Good evening, council members. I'd be happy to give you a brief presentation in light of the hour. If you'd like me to simply answer any questions you have on the report, I'd be happy to do that, but I can also provide a quick summary of the research we've done for you pursuant to your strategic plan in February.
So tell us what, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, I think we can just go direct to questions, and I do have a speaker on this item.
Okay.
Go ahead, Vice Mayor Davids.
So the question is, what is post versus publish? I mean, we send notifications out, and I guess that's the existing public notification practice. So I don't understand what we're going to do different.
We do two things under state law and the municipal code. We send out notices to immediately adjacent neighbors, or it could be a 300-foot radius. It depends on the type of application. And then we have traditionally also publish in the newspaper an announcement. But state law and the Muni Code give us the option for conditional use permits, variances, non-legislative types of acts to post at the site. Basically, you can post in three locations. You can post at the library, the city hall, and the site. And our position is that that might be more meaningful to people. For example, we get a lot of comments that I don't read the newspaper, the section on the legal publications, et cetera, and so that's where we're coming from on that alternative.
If the neighbor's going to do a project that requires this sort of notification, there would be some sort of a posting in the front yard or someplace where people can see it as they go by, or
Correct.
Okay.
In addition to at City Hall and the library.
All right. And you would propose to keep the distance the same, the 300?
In light of the budget reductions, we are proposing that, but we have offered that as an option for the council to consider whether or not you want to extend the radius or to extend the time period. The implications of that obviously are, not obviously, you may not know this, but we studied this during the EDCC changes a couple of years ago. If you were to change the radius from 150 feet to 300 feet, for example, in the White Oaks area, you add on 70 more properties that you would notify. So obviously the process becomes more involved and more time intensive for staff. Delaying or having an extended public comment period, the impact would be that you would have a delay in application. You might be looked at less competitively, perhaps, than other communities in your jurisdiction if you want to bring in certain types of economic development. So just impacts to consider. And
remind us again where you start the radius. Let's say you got a 100-foot lot on the street.
Great question.
And it's 200 feet back.
It's from the boundaries of the property, not from the center of the property.
So you go to each boundary, and then you got concentric circles, and anything within those circles gets
Exactly.
noticed?
So for EDCC, for example, it's 150 feet radius, and for use permits, et cetera, it's a 300-foot radius currently.
Okay.
And it's your opinion that we should stick with a 300-foot radius, that's sufficient?
Yes. We think that there are a lot more meaningful types of outreach enhancements that we can do other than simply notifying people. We're finding people tend to discard the notices that they get from the city unless they're meaningful, unless they're watching them on Channel 27, they're looking at the website, word of mouth, citizens committees. Those types of outreach enhancements seem to be the most effective.
I think the posting really works. I mean, the word gets around the neighborhood pretty quick once the posting notice goes up.
And that's really a
That's
good
good.
reflection of your neighborhood. People that are walking around, walking their dogs, walking along with their children or their neighbors, that's your neighborhood.
Yeah, I like the posting idea myself.
I guess I didn't pick up on that, actually, and I like that, too. I know a project I did in Palo Alto recently, they require posting, and they have these nifty little wickets and corrugated plastic signs. The only concern that the wife had, the couple, was that there's a lot of kids in the neighborhood and it would get torn down pretty quickly. But I was out to their project about 3 weeks after their posting requirement started, and the sign was still there. So I guess the kids did not take it down.
It's worth taking a picture of, though, because it does happen for our files.
Ah, yeah, right. What was the question I had? I did have a question here, but I can't think of what it was. So, oh, I know what it was. Website. It was, and this is half question, half commentary, that I got from a resident that if our website was structured, or not our website, but the TV postings were structured more in a way where you knew, just like the council meetings, that you know that they come on at certain times to be repeated. And if the, like if we had where these postings, they're going to be, 4 o'clock on Thursday, so if you want to tune in at that time, and there would be other times too, I suppose. That was a suggestion I got from a resident, and I thought it was a pretty good one, so I thought I'd throw that out there.
It's a good idea.
I wish I could remember who told me that, because I would give him credit.
Oh.
Was that where it came from? Very good, Pat. Thank you. Mr. Grisilli?
No, I just didn't know if there was any public comment or somebody wanted to talk on this. Or...
Yes, we do. And she just spoke, but do you want to come up to the mic? Okay, very good. So,
can I call the question on this item, or
you may
make a motion that we? What am I doing here?
You're going to make a motion that we follow staff recommendations.
Follow staff recommendations.
And that we post versus publish.
And we post versus publish. Thank you.
Alternative 1.
I'll second.
Yes. Okay, we had a motion by Councilmember Grisilli to accept the recommendations as they are in the staff report and to post versus publish, and that was seconded by the Vice Mayor, Tom Davids. Roll call.
Councilmember Grisilli?
Yes.
Councilmember Davids?
Yes.
Councilmember Lewis?
Yes.
Mayor Grocott?
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you
Ms.
very
Holloman.
much.
Next is consideration of an endorsement for the Parks for the Future countywide 8-cent sales tax increase ballot measure. And just one comment before you go into this, Barry. I did speak to the city manager about this, and just as a policy, we do not endorse ballot measures unless they do have an impact on the city, and we see this as having a possible impact on our budget. So I just wanted to put that out there. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Grocott and members of the council. You have before you tonight a recommendation from the Parks and Recreation Commission. They recommended on a 5-0 vote that the council endorse really the concept of the Parks for the Future, which is a countywide 1/8 cents sales tax proposal that it be placed on the ballot for November. So what we're really seeking is your support to place it on the ballot for November. Because as the mayor correctly said, until it's an actual ballot measure, there is no endorsement of that. So we're really looking for support to put it on the ballot measure. This is a countywide effort that's been going on for a couple of years. It's involved every city in the county parks and recreation, as well as the special districts that are listed in the staff report. Councilmember Davids, Commissioners Cecily Harris and Carol Taylor have attended meetings for this, as has Brian Moore and myself. It's truly been the epitome of a collaborative effort to get all these cities and these agencies together and to work out a very complicated issue like this. The money would raise, it would be an 8-cent sales tax increase. There has been polling on that that's what the voters would support. It would raise approximately $15 million per year for the county. San Carlos would get about $296,000. It would be ongoing funding. The money would be only for parks and recreation. We could spend it for anything that we want. We could spend it for capital. We could spend it for staffing. We could spend it for maintenance, for programs, however we best chose to spend it. There is mention in the report about maintenance of effort. That was a long time working that out. And the idea is that when you talk to the voters, as was done in the polling, and when you talk to them individually, people that are in support of this do not want to see the budget automatically cut by the same amount. So there's some language for that. It would cost each taxpayer approximately $18 a year. Sales tax fluctuates, of course, and so there's no guarantee of what it would be from year to year, but it's about $18. One of the key people behind this is the executive director of the San Mateo County Parks Foundation, and that's Julia Bott. She also is in the audience with us tonight, so if you had any detailed questions I couldn't answer, she knows just about everything about this issue. And Cecily Harris, who is the incoming chair of the commission, is also there. But the key decision tonight before you is to support putting it on the ballot and endorsing the concept. And at this point, I would take any questions you may have.
Okay, questions? Tom, are you going to ask a question?
Well, I'd be glad to espouse on the merits of this request, or make a motion that we move ahead and put it on the ballot. But no, I don't have anything specific. Barry mentioned it, and Julia certainly could confirm it, but it's been a long process that I thought has really turned out very well. I had, admittedly, my doubts going in with all these people together, whether we'd ever figure out a formula that we could all agree to, but it worked, and the group that basically sponsors the initiative came together and I think did very good work.
Yeah, it's also an issue that with my involvement with Park Rec Commission, I've followed for as long as since it started. I think from a couple of 2.5 years ago or something like that, when we had the initial presentation. So don't take the lack of questions as lack of interest. They're incredibly interested. This is again, not to espouse too much, but a valuable thing and great effort.
Well, I'm going to make some comments before there's a motion, because I am terribly conflicted by this measure, and I understand what you're saying, Barry, that it's an endorsement to put it on the ballot, and I can see, reading it, the struggle that went on. You can almost hear the discussions in the room regarding where you are with your Parks and Rec funding now, and if you get the money, not having that cutback in that same amount and so forth. But anytime something ties the hands of decision makers and policy makers and people who set budgets and so forth, I rail against it. And I understand sometimes even the voters do things with statewide proposals to tie the hands of the legislators because they don't spend their money the way we want them to. So we pass things like Prop 42 and say you can only spend that money on roads, and then they find a way to spend it on something else anyways. But that's part of the democratic process, and that's part of what you elect people to make decisions, and if they don't do them correctly the way you want them to, then you fire them by going to the polling place and not voting for them the next time. And I really struggle with this kind of thing where it ties the hands of the decision makers. And for instance, even in our city, quite frankly, I think relative to our whole budget, and if you look at other cities, we've funded Parks and Rec in a healthy manner. No question about it. And if we were to find ourselves in a position of having to cut back, this measure, the way it's written, would penalize us. And that's the difficulty I have with it. So I'm not in a position to support it, even though I endorse the concept, and I think sales tax in this regard is a good way to go. And I almost would rather see this be, it was initiated by the county because the county needs the money for their parks, and I would almost rather have seen it just be the county and forget about the cities. I think, quite frankly, part of that was done to get buy-in and to get more people to support the measure, but be that as it may, those are my thoughts on it, and I wanted to get that out there before we voted. Thank you.
Could I call the question?
You may.
Make a motion to endorse the placing of this item, as Mr. Weiss said, on the November ballot.
I'll second.
Okay, it's been, the motion was by Councilmember Grisilli, and the second was by Mr. Lewis. Roll call.
Councilmember Grisilli?
Yes.
Councilmember Lewis?
Yes.
Councilmember Davids?
Yes.
Mayor Grocott?
No. And I think that brings us then to item 9E, which is consideration of ratifying the 2007 Belmont San Carlos Fire Department Revenue and Appropriations Budget.
Yes.
Yes.
Mayor and members of council, this is the first of a series of items you'll begin to see from the newly renamed Belmont San Carlos Fire Department. You'll recall in an earlier council meeting when you approved the new amended and restated JPA that certain major decisions of that new entity, including budgets, labor relations settlements, workers' comp, debt, et cetera, will now come to each of the city councils for ratification, and this is the first in that series. In this particular instance, you are ratifying the 06-07 Belmont San Carlos Fire Department budget, and a particular note for San Carlos, this will increase our share of the budget from $4.926 million to $5.267 million, an increase of 6.9%. And this is, as was stated earlier during Mr. Weiss's presentation, simply to continue the so-called base budget, and this also continues the so-called 50-50 revenue sharing formula. It is recommended by the Fire Board and your two Fire Board members, Mayor Grocott, Councilmember Grisilli.
Okay, thank you. Any questions?
My only question from earlier, which was handled by Mr. Weiss, was whether or not the vacant positions were still in the budget for the year, and so that we could
Fire positions?
Yes.
Yes.
And that they were. So that's correct.
To fill those. To fill those positions, yes, it is.
So procedurally, this is for 2006-07.
Correct.
That's correct.
One-year budget.
And when do we get the projected budget forward? Is that something?
Are you talking about the budget that would have the enhancements?
Yeah.
That will come to you sometime in July. The Fire Board will meet on Wednesday to discuss the enhanced budget and the potential assessment, and then that would come back to you at one of your two meetings in July. Has not been established yet which of those two meetings.
So when we went into this, we agreed to sort of kind of a three-party situation. We had San Carlos, we had Belmont, and we had South County Fire.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we have a pretty good handle on what the two cities will be asked to do. And my question is, what does South County Fire bring to the table that we should know about before we activate some sort of a long-term budget process?
I think tonight's action is simply to keep the status quo. I think when we come back to you in July, your subcommittee and I will bring back the proposed enhancements, and we will bring back the same spreadsheet you saw at the last meeting, and then it'll be up to this council as well as the other council and the Fire Board to decide what enhancements you wish to have and what you wish to go to the voters to in terms of what level of assessment. And as we talked about last time, it is a protest hearing of the property owners, and it is, at the end of the day, up to them to decide.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Entertain a motion.
Well, I'll make a motion that we approve we ratify the fiscal year 2007 Belmont San Carlos Fire Department revenue and appropriations budget.
Second.
Okay, that was a motion by Councilmember Grisilli to approve the 2000 budget for Belmont San Carlos Fire Department, and a second by Vice Mayor Davids.
Councilmember Grisilli?
Yes.
Councilmember Davids?
Yes.
Councilmember Lewis?
Yes.
Mayor Grocott?
Yes. Okay, don't pack your bags yet. We had some items that were pulled off the consent calendar, and those items are item G, H, and K. And we have 5 minutes to cover those. So item H is authorizing rejection of sole bid for Belmont Creek Industrial Road project. Oh, I'm sorry. You're right. Yeah, no, thanks for the correction. Item G, authorizing the city manager to execute a contract with Moore Consulting for professional planning services for the Palo Alto Medical Foundation. Let the city manager speak on this item first.
This is simply a contract for planning services. The planning services are paid for by the Palo Alto Medical Foundation as part of the application process.
Thank you.
That was my question, was would it be reimbursed?
Okay, yes, it will be. Okay, with that, I would actually let's take H, and then we could end K, and then we could consider all possibly with one motion. Item H is authorizing rejection of sole bid for Belmont Creek Industrial Road project. Mr. McTarry.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, we received only one proposal, and the contractor knew he's the only plan holders and submitted a bid that is not realistic.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Bell, your question or comment?
I want to know why it was rejected. Too expensive or not appropriately drafted or what?
The engineer's estimate of the construction is $244,000. This bid was $1.3 million.
Okay.
2 down.
Okay, 2 down. Item K
Rolling.
is approving amendments to the city's strategic plan and 6-month objective matrix. Mr. City Manager?
That report just reflects the changes that we've made in consideration of the new budget that's been adopted, and it's our strategic plan that we bring back monthly.
Okay.
Jeff actually came over and asked me what I was going to ask, and could he go home after he explained it? And I said yes.
Okay, so we're
The
fine
only
then.
comment I have is I'm still troubled that the $15,000 for customer service training was taken out of the budget. That was very important to us in the Building Community Task Force, and as you can see in our report, we stressed it. So, but again, grieve the loss of customer service training.
Thank you. Okay, so I would entertain a motion then to approve items G, H, and K on the consent calendar.
So moved.
Second.
Roll call?
Councilmember Lewis?
Yes.
Councilmember Grisilli?
Yes.
Councilmember David?
Yes.
Mayor Grocott?
Yes. And with that, we're adjourned.
We don't do that anymore.